All right, with that, let's go ahead and call the Budget and Public Employees Committee to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderwoman Schweitzer.
Present.
Alderwoman Sanier.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich.
Present.
Chair Spencer.
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Oldenburg. We have 4 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Okay, so as we all know, the Budget and Public Employees Committee is now kind of a combination of what was formerly known as the Ways and Means Committee and Public Employees. And I'm excited to have our first hearing here today to start off the very long and arduous and very detailed budget process. Just to give a little bit of kind of background, sort of some ground setting for the next few weeks. As we all know via email, according to our clerk, our city charter maintains that this committee shall be meeting daily, Monday through Thursday, until we secure the budget. So to our scheduling ability, we'll be hosting budget hearings from now until we get through this process. All members of the Board of Aldermen, in addition to committee members, are welcome at all of our hearings. In fact, I encourage that. I will be further encouraging members of the Board of Aldermen to at least attend a hearing or two to understand kind of how the departments are organized, how the budgets are set, and to kind of get used to the process. I think it's a very instructive and informational process for all of us. We will be having 2 public hearings where we'll be soliciting input from the general public, one in an evening and one on a Saturday. Those dates have been set and have been posted. So I will encourage members of the committee here to encourage your residents and constituents to join us, especially as we're moving through the process and we get questions. It'd be helpful to have those in that public format. As we go through these hearings, I'll be taking notes as far as follow-up items from budget, from department heads. So feel free to ask for follow-up information. We'll be logging that and following up with our department heads. And as far as what the role of our committee here, of course, we're going to be hearing from departments throughout the city of St. Louis. As we work out the calendar here, if there are departments that you'd like to have that you don't see on the committee list, please let me know, and we'll make sure that we try to incorporate every department that the committee would like to hear. One thing I will ask of committee members, I want you to feel free to ask as many questions as you'd like of the department heads, of our budget director, Paul Payne, but I would like to keep any ward-specific, neighborhood-specific budgetary questions out of this committee process. Otherwise, we're going to get very granular into the weeds, and really what we want to be talking about is the budget, not specific things. So that is a set of ground rules I'd like to kind of lay out here. And with that, for today, we have Budget Director Paul Payne, who's going to give us kind of an overview of the budget. We have the Comptroller, Darlene Green, and we're going to go into public safety. Generally speaking, we would have the Board of E&A here as our first set of department heads, but given scheduling conflicts, we were unable to do that, so we're starting off our budget process here this year for fiscal year 2024 in a slightly unusual manner, but to make sure that we have enough time to hear all of our departments here. Okay. Do I have any questions from the committee before we get started? Okay, Mr. Paul Payne, if you don't mind. I don't believe we need to swear you in.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the Budget and Public Employees Committee. Before I get into my presentation, I just wanted to as a refresher, just let you know what documents that we've distributed to you so you know which ones to reference. There is what we refer to as the annual operating plan, which is the thicker of the book with a lot of dividers. That has a lot of the budget summaries as well as narratives and other related information to the budget in sort of a summary form and graphics and things like that. So that is more something that you reference throughout the process, just to get some detailed information related to the budget itself. We also have the what is called the line item detail book. That's what is sort of the meat of the budget, which includes the budget by account and funds, and it's got personnel schedules and such. It's often what you refer to most when you're looking at the composites of an individual budget. And then we also have the capital improvements plan, which is a smaller document. It's a 5-year document, which is approved by the capital committee as well each year. And then we also have the revenue book, which is a smaller book, but it's the detail of city revenue, the estimates. And then finally, we did print out a hard copy of the Board Bill 1. Of course, you have your own Board Bill 1 version, but this just is a hard copy of the budget ordinance itself. All right, I'm going to start on the budget presentation. You should all have copies. By the way, all of these documents are posted online on the Budget Division's website, so if you reference that, you can pull up all of these documents. The annual operating plan for FY 2024 totals $1.32 billion. That's an increase of 7.3% over the previous fiscal year. If you can see from the slide there, the largest has the general, all the general and special fund components of that. The general fund is the largest share.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, Mr. Paul, but could you just broadly speaking describe the budget as we're looking at it, how the process of what we're looking at was delivered to the Board of Aldermen? And I know that may be kind of redundant for some, but especially for new members and for the general public, it's helpful to kind of understand how the budget was developed and how it was presented to us.
Beginning about the midpoint of the current fiscal year, where we start looking about how we're doing in this current fiscal year, and then so we're somewhere around the end of December, early January, I'm reviewing estimates of revenues. We ask departments to submit their estimates of revenues of the coming fiscal year. And we're also reviewing how well we're doing this fiscal year, right? And so that gives us an idea about what the order of magnitude of revenues are for the coming fiscal year. We also want to identify any capital needs for the departments, so we issue requests for departments to submit those, and any particular new initiatives that we need to be aware of, or any unknown or known increases in specific costs that we would need to be aware of when we're issuing budget allocations. So we start the process off by issuing a budget allocation to the various departments. And that's just sort of our first stab at trying to say, okay, based on all what we know about estimates and such, this is what we allocate to departments to maintain a balanced budget. So as that process proceeds, we start in February, start receiving budget requests, and that leaches into March as well. We typically have meetings with the various departments because believe it or not, sometimes they go over their budget allocations. So we try to reconcile those things, trying to say what's behind the numbers, and then in the meantime, we're also going through the third quarter and updating any of our revenue estimates at the same time. So at the conclusion of that, sometime around the end of March, we're trying to get a scenario where all the requests, if not met, but at least have been accommodated to the extent that we can with the existing revenue and revised estimates. And then through, by the second week in March, we do present a balanced budget to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. Now, the Board of E&A, we've been working with the Board of E&A through that process, so typically any of their new initiatives would be reflected in those numbers, but occasionally they have, oh, well, we have these other things we'd like to amend or change. And there were a few amendments at the Board of E&A this year. So under the charter requirements, the Board of E&A is required to present recommend and submit a budget to the Board of Aldermen 60 days prior to the start of the fiscal year. That would be May 1st. So that's, in fact, what they did. I believe it was the last week of April they recommended the budget, and so that was presented and sent down to the board. Now, the Board of Aldermen has 60 days, the next 60 days to adopt a budget. And failing that, then the budget submitted by the Board of E&A would become budget. That is sort of a mechanism that was approved in the charter back in 1988 that ensured that one way or another, we will have a budget by July 1, a balanced budget July 1. So that's actually a good thing. And so, but it does put timelines on what you can do. Now, you as a board can make cuts in the budget, But if you would seek increases in any particular line items, that requires the approval of E&A. So typically what happens is you'll go through the budget and find things you might want to change, some increases, some decreases. But then if there were increases, you would, in the past, what you've done is suspend the hearings here, submit something to E&A for its consideration in the month of June at its E&A meeting, and then they would consider it and then send it back, and then you'd have whatever it was that they agreed to and all, and so you'd come up with a recommendation, so you're able to make a final recommendation at some time in June, so you can get it back to the board, the full board, and have it adopted by the end of the month so that you meet your charter requirements. And that's the process.
Okay, thank you. Members of the committee, do we have any questions about kind of the process of how the budget was presented to us, or what our authorities or anything of that matter are, before we move forward?
I just had a quick question about, you said that we usually, if we were to decide to make some cuts and we submit it back to E&A, we usually suspend meeting. Is it usually that by that point, the committee usually makes all the recommendations at once? I guess I'm just curious, why don't we continue with other budget business while waiting on them to get back to us?
Because if you have some of those changes which are increases, only you need E&A approval to do those. So, so for instance, let's say you submitted only some of them, E&A has its meeting in June, and then you wanted some others. Well, E&A is not meeting again,
Yeah.
so you won't get the opportunity to have those considered. So the idea is, and there's a bit of negotiation with E&A at that time, and you say, hey, look, we'd like to see, we have some reductions here, and we'd like to see these increases here, or whatever. It's somewhat of a give and take between this committee and the Board of E&A at that point.
Are there any timeline requirements? Like once we do submit something, do they have a certain time period that they have to respond to us by?
There's not a requirement, but typically it's the June meeting of the Board of E&A, which is the third week. I mean, they can
Call it emergency,
schedule that
yeah.
around somewhat, but the idea is that getting it back in time for you to do your business so that you can get it to the full board in order to give yourself whatever the time is to get it passed by the full board of aldermen.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Paul. And now that we've kind of gone through that, we can kind of move on to the presentation.
Great. As I said, the total proposed budget for fiscal 2024 is $1.32 billion. That's an increase of 7.3% over the previous fiscal year. And you can see from the illustration below the components of this, the various funds. The general fund being the largest is up 5% at $566.8 million. And we'll discuss that in a bit. That's mostly on par with what revenues are tracking this fiscal year as opposed to any increase assumed for next fiscal year. The special revenue category at $232.6 million is up 7.7%. The largest share of those increases you're going to see is in the use tax of $7.1 million, which is up this year, and $3.9 million in the Convention and Tourism Fund, which is the restaurants and hotel taxes, which has also outperformed this year. And then a lot of the special fund categories consist of sales taxes, which are actually doing well as well this year. They are up. Now, we do have a couple of declines, particularly with gaming funds are down. I think the GBL, the Graduated Business License Tax, was also done this past year. In the grant fund category of $80.2 million, that's a decline of 8.3%. The largest reason for that decline is last year, on a one-time basis, we did have that $19 million appropriation from ARPA. And that was it was $12 million for a one-time $2,000 pay initiative, if you remember that. The ARPA appropriation, the $12 million,
Yeah.
that was a $2,000 payment to all employees, and that was $12 million. Then there was a $5 million payment for building and stabilization and $2 million for affordable housing. That was a one-time thing. So that is not repeated this year, so that's why you see the decline in grant funds. Although you do have some increases in human services grants and some CDA grants as well. In the debt service fund, that includes both the general, and because of the new accounting system, this includes both the GO, the general obligation debt, as well as some lease debt. That is at $14 million, that's an increase of 27.3%. That assumes also a new issuance of general obligation bonds and that has been incorporated in this budget. The capital improvement funds at $42.2 million, that's an increase of 12.8%. That is largely driven through the performance of our sales taxes, because most of our sales taxes most of our capital funds are supported by sales taxes, as well as an increase in the gas tax, because we are receiving the benefit of the state's increase in gasoline taxes, and those are up $2.7 million in this fiscal year. Enterprise funds at $281 million, that's a 17% increase. You will see increases at both the airport at $34 million, which is a 20% increase, and the water division at $6.5 million. It's about a 9.6% increase. The internal services funds, those are mostly funds that departments charge to each other. So it would be like the gasoline, streets, parks, and all pay the Equipment Services Division fund its trucks and such, and that we use something called an internal service fund. So and we also pay for health insurance and all, and so it's sort of a combined fund that we utilize to pay those costs, but it's not something that's discretionary, and that's up 5.1%. So you have a total budget of $1,323 million, and again, in the pie chart below, you see general fund is 43% of that total. On the next slide, this is just tracking some of our major revenue sources. In the first chart, you can see the earnings tax, which is our largest single source of revenue. It's up 3.9% to date, and there are a couple of components of the earnings tax. The withholding piece, that's the 1% that's taken out of everyone's paycheck when they on withholding. And that's up 5.9%, while the corporate portion, which is the 1% of corporate profits, was actually down 6.8%. On corporate profits, those are typically paid in the fourth quarter, so we still haven't seen those. So that's a little cautious about where we expect to end this fiscal year. But overall, major tax revenues we've seen doing well this year, although we did see some weakening in the third quarter, so that's something to keep an eye on. Our 10-year growth rate, by the way, on the earnings tax is something like 3.2%. The payroll tax has following a similar trend. Through the third quarter, it was up by 6.7%. I did look at the first month of April, which is the first month of the fourth quarter, and it had come down a little bit more. It's down to 5.5%. Still exceeding budget, but it is showing some signs of weakening there. And its 10-year annual growth rate is about 1.8% per year, so it's outperforming this fiscal year. On the next slide, sales taxes. Sales tax is second to the earnings tax, probably the largest source of revenue the city has. So, but it's typically, and you can see from the fiscal year-to-date chart there, it's up 10.5% through the third quarter, and actually adding in May, it was 10.9%, or adding in the month of April, it was 10.9%. Now, typically, our long-term, it is not a long-term growth tax. It is 10-year growth rate is 1.8%. So you're thinking that this has been boosted somewhat by inflation as well. So, so the question going forward is whether it reverts to its normal growth pattern, and as inflation slows, your revenue growth will slow as well. The local use tax had typically and historically had been mostly paid by businesses, but as more online retailers have been paying that tax, it's become more and more like the sales tax. Although, and it was up 9.6% to the third quarter, although also in April I saw that it had actually slowed. It's up 6% through the last month payment. And its 10-year growth rate is 4.2%, but much of that has been drawn because of our rates. As the sales tax increases have risen, so has the use tax. If you look at the underlying growth rate, it's more like 2.4%. And finally, on the last, slide 5, a discussion of the restaurant and hotel taxes. These were the hardest hit during the pandemic, and so it took the longest to come back from the pre-pandemic times. And you can see that they are doing well. The restaurant gross receipts tax is up 20% through the third quarter, and the hotel gross receipts tax is up 37.7%. So this brings them back to where they were pre-pandemic, even on an inflation-adjusted basis, which is a good thing. Although going forward, again, their 10-year growth rate is still about 1.1% for restaurants and 1.8% for hotels. So looking forward, we expect that growth to sort of parry back somewhat. So on slide 6, this is an illustration of both the general and major special funds. The general fund, a couple of columns I wanted to point out. So the FY23 third quarter revised column at 567, that would be our estimate, revised estimate for general fund for fiscal 23, the current fiscal year. Of course, that's pending the fourth quarter. We do have some large numbers coming in for the fourth quarter still. And then all the other taxes, many of them which are based, as you can see, on the sales tax portions. The only one trailing in this illustration is the gaming fund, which has been somewhat flat this fiscal year in its trailing estimates. Looking at the general fund budget, starting on slide 7, this is sort of a recap of where we were starting with this year's budget and then looking at the major increases and decreases in the general fund. Beginning revenue base of $540 million. We're currently tracking over that by about $27 million, again, pending the fourth quarter. And then I do not anticipate any growth for next year. I've got some revenue, both the earnings and payroll tax, I've actually got a declines built in. With the sales tax, I've got about a 1% increase. So it's pretty much a no growth scenario, looking for anticipating a slowdown in the economy, if not an outright recession. So that would bring you to $566.9 million in revenue. Yeah, I see the question.
Paul, could we stop right there just
Sure.
real quickly? Because I think this is a fairly important point here between these two slides, looking at 6 and 7, seeing absolutely no growth projected between last year and this year.
Right.
It's kind of a sobering moment for us all to kind of soak that in, not only anticipating maybe a recession here, but also a slowing of growth in the city of St. Louis. Is that, I mean, or
Yeah,
how would you describe kind of, I mean, looking, typically speaking, when you're looking at a city's budget, we have increasing costs in doing business. Obviously our residents are requesting more services. We have increased costs in pension and health care and inflation and other things, but we are seeing a 0% growth projected between 2023 and 2024.
Right. Correct. Yeah. What you're seeing in the budget is the budget reflects the increases that we've gotten this fiscal year. So this fiscal year, we're outperforming by that $20+ million. And so we're capturing all of that. But looking forward, and this is sort of, when you look at what the projections are for the economy and economic growth, most of the outlooks were negative. I mean, when you look forward and say, okay, we're going to anticipate an economic slowdown the latter part of this calendar year, if not an actual recession. And going through historical terms, when you look at potential for a recession, that's where actually revenues decline, and we've been through that before. And if you look at our fund balance and operating balances, you'll see that 08, 09 and that type of thing, as well as when we hit the pandemic, that was some severe declines. I don't anticipate that in these numbers, but I do incorporate something where it's little to no growth. And so yeah, I mean, it's anyone's guess what actually occurs. I mean, I know the feds are looking for trying to achieve a soft landing in terms of the economy. You never know where you're going to hit it. I mean, they could either be successful, or something hits the wall, you have a banking collapse, whatever, and then you've got a serious recession on your hands. So I think it's trying to bridge that uncertainty with a little cautious going forward with the revenues for next fiscal year, and we'll just see where we end up.
I just want to make sure that our committee is grounded in those sobering facts, that our projections here for this fiscal year 2024 reflect pretty much what 2023 looks like, with 0 growth, which is for the first time I've seen that since being down here. And so it's something we need to really keep in mind when we're looking at what we're projecting to spend next year.
So so we're starting with this fiscal year's budget of $540 million, right? So the biggest increase you're going to see in the budget has to do with the pay package. Pay packages, as you're aware, both police and fire got a significant pay increase related to this pay package that's pending, that will be pending before the Board of Aldermen, of an 8 to 13% matrix increase, as well as some increases in the education incentives and such. So on the police side, it was $9.7 million on general fund portion. The total package, including fire, just so you know, and you're the Public Employees Committee, there's a pay parity provision which provides that that firefighters get the same pay raises as police on a rank scale. That total piece was about an $18 million increase. Now, some of that is on special funds. That includes an estimated increase in pensions. And we're providing that because that's over and above what you'd expect. The pension funds provide an actuary, and they make projections based on what they expect pay to be, and this is over and above that. So we were anticipating the pension increase associated with this pay increase will be higher than what we anticipated. So that's the 8 to 13% matrix increase for police and fire. On police pension, you have the normal, aside from the regular pay increase, or from the increase related to the pay package. You have a $700,000 increase in police pension costs, fire pension, both FRS and FRP, that's the fire retirement system, which is frozen, and the fire retirement plan, which is the new plan, collectively up $2.7 million. And then we're also providing for pay increases for other employees, all other non-uniform employees, of about 3% across the board. That's $3.9 million. In addition to a merit increase of 1.5%, which is similar to what we did last year. Now, we don't budget for the 1.5 specifically because typically it's awarded on your date of anniversary of hire, which means it's going to be somewhat less than 1% overall, because if you were hired in September versus hiring in, you're going to have some of your employees that are hired in the first part of the year, some of your employees hired in the latter part of the year, but when you combine those, you're going to have something that's half of the year you're getting this 1.5% increase. So it's something less than 1%, and so we expect departments to be able to absorb that. You also have an increase in the ERS pension increase. I'm going to be talking about pensions a little bit later in the presentation, and that's a little worrisome number there because the ERS pension is up to about 17% of pay, and it's projected to continue to increase. So we'll get into that a little bit. So you see in increases and decreases, the biggest chunk is going to be for pay and benefit related in this budget. In various, following here are some of the cost categories, excluding pay. Of course, the Board of Aldermen, we got the full year's cost of all of the staff increases we've had down at the board. Mayor's office is pretty much flat. Department of Personnel has a few new positions and a new deputy position. Information System Services, they've got, they continue to have contractual service related to the new accounting and payroll system, about $2.5 million, and they do have 2 new positions. The City Councilor has a couple of positions as well. The Comptroller's Office up $2.5 million. The biggest increase you're going to see related to that is insurance, the cost of insuring many of our city buildings. There have been a number of large claims over the last few years, and our premiums are going up. So about $2.3 million increase in the Comptroller's Office budget, which you'll see in our line item for that purpose. Going to the next slide. There was, in citywide accounts, pay adjustments. We had a one-time pay adjustment item of $5 million in Department 190. That's not repeated this year, so that's a decline. And then an increase related to the CPI adjustment for the preservation of the convention center, which the city is obligated under that management agreement. In the Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, not big changes there. Recreation Division is adding a couple of lifeguards full-time as opposed to per performance in order to provide more year-round services for their pools. And then Soulard Market, although it's not, it doesn't register here on you as a number, a big number, but they're adding a full-time position rather than a part-time position to manage the market itself. In judicial offices, the big increases there, they included their pay in their budget as specifically rather than the adjustments I talked about earlier. Circuit Attorney's Office pretty much flat with the current fiscal year. Sheriff does have the second year of its radio lease payment, which it started this year. Circuit Court's up a couple positions. They are transitioning to a state data system mandated by this state. And then public administration, juvenile detention is up to 0.7 million related to maintenance and pay costs of their employees. Big change in county offices. Let me go in through here. The election board is a non-election year, so, and every other year they go up and down based on whether it's election year or not because of the cost of running an election. So it's a non-election year, so that's down 700,000. Medical examiner, its costs of exams and the number of cases are actually elevated, so that's up 400,000. Going to the next slide, in the Department of Streets, some of those increases, like Director of Streets, that's a movement of some positions, mostly from towing to the Director of Streets. And Traffic and Streets also has some supply accounts that have gone up, also mostly wiring and poles and stuff like that, the cost of replacing things, knockdowns and such. The big increase you're going to see in the street department is the cost of refuse. The total disposal fee increases $3.5 million, or to $11.5 million, which is an increase of $3.6 million. And $500,000 of that's going to be in their the use tax fund, which is their bulky pickup collection. But you're going to see that is a major increase in refuse costs. And so that's something that obviously it's been highlighted recently in discussions at E&A as well as with the department itself. So I think that's something that's going to be reviewed over the next year, certainly, because it is a rising cost that we need to address. Under the Department of Public Safety, other than the pay, which we've just discussed, here are some of the increases and decreases. The biggest thing with the police department, other than pay that we were talking about, is the allocation of about $2 million in fleet purchases. One of the initiatives trying to get take-home vehicles for police officers was a big item in some of the pay negotiations, and that was accommodated in this budget. In the fire department, not many changes there. Because there are increases because both police and fire are supported by various other funds, as those funds go up and down, you can sometimes see some balancing act between the general fund and some of the special funds. So that's why you see increases and decreases in those other sales taxes, those special fund taxes. Slide 10, under the Department of Public Safety, they are up about $800,000. This includes $100,000 for some professional service studies, as well as a $500,000 for a temporary tag initiatives that was approved by the Board of E&A in April. The Office of Violence Prevention, you see that $2.5 million. Most of that is not new. It is the consolidation of efforts that were in two other budgets, both the Health and Director of Public Safety. But it will be the first full year of the appropriation for the Office of Violence Prevention at $2.5 million. And then on the Department of Corrections, you see a big number there that they do have a lot of vacancies there, and they've been have not filled those and have been underspending their personnel. And so I think a review in terms of how many positions need to be actually budgeted in there, but failing that, what we've done is taken some salary savings more closely to what they're actually spending, as opposed to as opposed to reducing the actual positions. In the Director of Health, that supportive reentry program, again, that was part of the program moved to Office of Violence Prevention. The Board of Public Service, a few increases there, both on facilities management and our Equipment Services Division for fleet, for cost of maintenance as well as fleet repair. And so with all those increases, that's $27 million. That gets you $566.8, which is the estimated revenue for the fiscal year.
I do get a question, Madam Chair.
I'd like to take a quick break and see if we have any questions from members of the committee.
Sure.
Thank you, Paul. Going down my seniority list, Alderwoman Schweitzer, do you have any questions so far for the director?
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, I am going to have a lot of questions, I think, for each department, but for now, I'm just following along. Thank you for presenting today.
Okay. Alderwoman Saunier?
Yeah, I think same boat as Ann. I have a lot of questions, but I too think it might be better for specific departments.
Alderman Aldrich?
Well, I will break the line of whatever we got going here. I do got a couple questions, just for being new member and clarity. So as we go back to Parks and Recreation, forestry, so it says up 2 positions reduced per performance.
They are to be receiving some additional funds from LRA, which will offset some of their per performance, which we had been in the general revenue.
Okay. And some of these, I'm sure I will ask deeper questions to the certain department. Going to public safety police, so I know, so you said between fire, I think estimated cost total was it 18 million?
Correct.
And then police was about 12 million?
No, combined.
Combined?
Combined, the total of that package, the 8 to
fire and police.
13% matrix, and this is all in. This includes pension increases and benefit increases related to the 8 to 13% increase in matrix is about 18 million.
And did that include EMT or?
No, it's uniformed police officers as well as firefighters, and you'll see in your table of organization anyone with the F designation, and EMTs are separate from that.
Okay, do we give EMT any raises this year?
Yeah, they will
Okay.
they will get the civilian increase.
So that's 18. So on top of that 18, there's a additional 2 million increase for capital improvements for vehicle fleets?
Yes,
And is that vehicle, I guess, how do I say it? It's improved the vehicles, but on top of it, there's going to be initiative for these vehicles and officers to take these cars home?
yes.
And was that a board thing or ENA thing?
That was one of the negotiated initiatives that when they went through the collective bargaining agreement, that was something that they agreed to as a goal to provide more take-home vehicles.
Okay.
Kara's saying it's between the union when they did negotiations for the new contract with the mayor's office and personnel.
Okay.
But it's not us. It's
Okay,
not us.
so it was through the ENA negotiation?
Well, it was
through the
actually
mayor's office.
Director of Personnel, Mayor's Office,
Personnel, yeah.
collectively negotiating with.
Gotcha. Okay, that's all the questions I got now.
Okay, and Director, I have a couple of additional questions along the same lines. When looking at that 18 million combined fire and police, I'm looking at the table here on page 7, and we've got a $9.7 million increase in police pay. The pension pay, the pension pay for increase for the police is 0.7 million, but what I'm a little bit confused about is the relationship between fire and police. $5 million increase for fire, and the pension increase as a percentage is so high. And looking at, I'm thinking of personnel in the police department versus fire. You have so many more police officers than fire, but the relative increases don't seem to reflect the personnel relative relationships. Can you help me understand what's going on there?
Sure. The 18 million is not this. This is the general, I'm talking about the general fund specifically. So
Okay.
this is the general fund share of that cost. But also, and so there's another 3.5 million, I believe it was 3.5 million in the use tax. When we get to that slide, I'll show you what that is. That the way pension costs work is that every October, pension, their fiscal year ends September 30th of each year. And so the condition of the fund on October 1st of each year is what is an actuary puts together in January of each calendar year. And that report is what generates the request for the contribution in the coming fiscal year, okay? So similar to what we did when we did if you remember, when we did that sales tax for the $6,000 increase, that also generated a pension increase over and above what had been anticipated. So we set aside funds for the anticipation of that. That's what we're doing in this instance. So in the use tax, when we get to the use tax slide, you'll see about $3.5 million or so allocated in anticipation, and that's a piece of that 18, But that's set aside separately because it's going to be paid in fiscal '25 for this increase that we're seeing in fiscal '24.
Okay, so just going back to this pay and benefits increase for the police and fire, when I see the $0.7 million increase in police pension, it represents roughly 8% of the increase in pay for police. But when I look at the $2.7 million increase in fire pension, it represents about 50% of the increase in the of the $5 million pay increase.
Okay.
Is there,
Yeah.
so
let me-
perhaps this is misleading, but if you could help clarify.
Neither one of those lines has anything to do with the pay increase. These are the normal, even if you set aside the regular pay increase, you would have had the 0.7 and the 2.7. Because every year we get a request for the pensions. And so in the use tax, I set aside the funds that we're going to be contributing for the 8 to 13%. So that we've covered in the other fund. These increases have to do with just the normal operating pension increase any given year.
No, understanding that, it still appears that the increase in the fire pension is significantly higher than
Right.
the increase in the police pension, and that's what I'm asking for
Oh,
clarity from you on.
And I've got a, if you go on to, well, I can jump. You've got a slide.
If you're going to go into it later.
Yeah, I've
Paul,
got a
then that's
couple
fine. It's
sli-
just- it just struck
You'll-
me
you'll-
as
you'll-
as an anomaly here that I thought we could go into.
Yeah, I've got two slides specifically to pensions if you want to.
Okay, well, we can go into that. And before we move forward, Alderman Aldridge, did you have a question?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we get to pensions, which is, I'm curious about, and maybe this isn't a question for you, Director, but how many employees we have per police per fire? Because that is interesting that the fire is way more. And I'm thankful for the men and women in our fire uniform, but.
Oh, absolutely. And when we'll go into that. I can explain when we get to that pension section.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions, and then we can let the director go along? It sounds like he's going to cover most of our questions anyway.
Okay, let me see, where were we? That was at the end of 10. Let's go to slide 11 on the general fund revenue outlook. We talked a little bit about revenue. And so this chart just shows you the major sources of general fund revenue and what we're estimating for FY24. The earnings tax, as I mentioned, was $207.8 million. That's our largest source, but I've got actually a decline built into the numbers, at negative 3.1, and anticipating the economic slowdown. Property tax, usually, I've got that $73.5 million. It's a 1.7% increase. Typically on property tax, you don't see if there is a decline resulting from property values going down or something, usually that would be a couple of years in the offing, not something that you would see immediately. Sales tax, I've got at $61.7 million. That's a 1% increase. The payroll tax, 41.4, also similarly to the earnings tax, I've got it knocked down to about 3.6%. Now, some increases we do see are on the franchise utility taxes, $54.5 million. That includes both the gross receipts taxes on natural gas, electric, and as well as our water and airport. And water particularly is estimated to be up by $1.6 million. The intergovernmental funds up 3.8%. That's $23.4 million. Most of that is in EMS, which provides medical transports. License fees pretty much flat at $13.9 million. We do see a small decline in departmental fees and fines to $59.2 million. That's a decline of 2%. We did have some one-time payments in the current fiscal year on departmental receipts that are not going to be repeated. And then in the other category, the biggest increase there is we have what's called the C&T fund, which contributes to the general fund. That's restaurant and hotel taxes. Because they outperformed this year, we're able to draw a little bit more than we typically would into the general fund this year. And so that's why you see that 10.9% increase. But overall, as we discussed earlier, I've got the budget as flat on the revenue side with revised estimates. And you can see from the chart below, earnings tax represents 37% of the total. Under the general fund expenditure outlook, again, I won't go through all these in detail, but you can see just as it lines up. General government, 8.7% increase. It's mostly the Board of Aldermen increase as well as ITSA and Department of Personnel. In finance, the 22.6% increase there is mostly that $2.3 million in insurance that we're paying on city buildings. Non-departmental's decline is that's the $5 million decrease we had after that one-time payment last fiscal year. Parks and Recreation up 3%, judicial offices up 5.6%, jumping down. Public safety, again, 5.9%. Most of that is related to the pay package we talked about. And streets up 9.2%. That is that cost of recycling, so and refuse disposal. So that's a major cost increase. Health and Human Services, that decline there, that's mostly because that, again, remember that function was moved to the Office of Violence Prevention. So that's not a decrease. That's mostly just a realignment of where those funds are budgeted. And then the Board of Public Service, which is equipment maintenance and facility maintenance. So that's the 5% increase, bringing it in line with this year's revenues. Okay, starting on slide 13, some of the special funds, some of the major special funds for the city. The largest being the local use tax at $56.8 million. That's an increase of was up 9.6%, although that's come down a bit. It's about 6% now through the most recent month. But if you look at that, I mentioned it just the use tax funds the majority of our health department, as well as a good chunk of our human services department. And overall, before we even allocate to those departments, Affordable Housing Trust Fund is funded at $6.5 million in use taxes, and then they also had some beginning balances which they're appropriating, so they're budgeted at $7.2 million this coming fiscal year. Healthcare Trust Fund at $5 million, by ordinance, is allocated $5 million per year. In previous years, that had been used for the health safety net, but given the expansion of Medicaid in the state of Missouri, there are some additional opportunities with spending those funds for other health purposes, and so you'll see that in this budget as well. Building demolition, also by ordinance, receives $3 million per year from the healthcare, or from the use tax, and that is budgeted in full. And so everything else in the use tax is what's considered excess use tax funds. And you can see the various alignments there. The biggest being the police department, which is up $2.2 million at $20 million of those funds. But I did want to point out that see that police and fire pension, that new pay package, $3.3 million. That's the amount I was referring to earlier. That's an estimated, I think it was something like $2.35 million for police and $0.7 million, something like that, for fire, as associated with the new pay package. So isolated that pension cost separately. And then the health department, $11.8 million, and human services at $1.7. So that's a total budget of $56.8 million in the use tax. The Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, it also is by ordinance, allocates its funds by various percentages, the largest of which is 60% for transit, which has been receiving these funds since 2018, since it was established, and it's estimated at $14 million for next year. At the end of the current fiscal year, it was estimated at just under $68 million, so about the end of next fiscal year, we should have about $82 million in that account. 10% of that goes to neighborhood 10% of the economic development sales tax goes to neighborhood stabilization. And then also, there are some prior year balances which have not been spent that they are also reappropriating because in order to spend it, you need to reappropriate it. So it includes $4 million in unspent previous balances. And that's for initiatives in PDA and CDA. 10% goes to workforce development, and that's managed by both Slate as well as Director of Human Services, and they've also included $2.1 million in unspent revenues for a $4.5 million budget. And then 10% also goes to the public safety infrastructure. And here's a new item for this current fiscal year. This budget includes $3.9 million for a new siren system at SEMA. So that's utilizing that 10% portion of economic development sales tax as well as some unspent balances from prior fiscal years. And then 10% goes to the city's capital fund, which is appropriated in the capital budget. So that's a total budget of $31.5 million. On slide 14, you have, we discussed Prop P. Prop P was a sales tax for public safety, a half-cent sales tax for public safety, which, as the sales tax goes up, the use tax goes up. So there was a piece that was allocated, the portions of the public safety sales tax were allocated for purposes, police, fire, and circuit attorney, and then the use tax piece was also allocated for various purposes, and you can see all those detailed there. So with an estimate of $23.3 million, plus some balances the current fiscal year, the proposed budget under the Prop P for the sales tax is $25.1 million. Police department gets 66% of the of the sales tax funds there. Fire department is 28%, and the circuit attorney's office receives 6%. Under the use tax piece, the use tax revenues of $5.9 million. The after-school program gets 25%, and that's utilized for Director of Public Safety for summer jobs, as well as a police cadet program of $700,000. Circuit attorney also receives 7.7% of those revenues, and plus an unspent balance that would be $1.5 million. 25% of that use tax revenue is allocated to recreation programs, the recreation division, which with beginning balance is $1.9 million. 17.3% is allocated to building demolition. Again, with some unspent balances there is $1.5 million. And 25% is for social work and mental health. And you'll see that in the Human Services budget at $2.1 million. On slide 15, this discusses the proposed capital budget at $42.2 million, which is an increase of $4.9 million or 13% over the previous fiscal year. Most of, as I mentioned earlier, most of this reflects the fact the sales tax is up, and you have a $2.4 million increase related to that excess sales taxes, as well as a $2.7 million increase in the road and bridge capital improvements from the gas tax. And as you know, the state of Missouri passed a gas tax increase, which would be gradual, 2.5 cents per year over a number of years. And so we're beginning to see that increase. We did take a hit this year related to the reallocation because of the census, and so our share went down. But going forward, we should be seeing an increase because right now we're estimated to be 4.9. By the time this is all done, we should probably be somewhere around $8 million per year on the gas tax for capital fund. And the total capital budget of $42.2 million, you can see the various allocations in the pie chart. About just under, about 41% or so of this is debt service, so there's not much discretionary there. We do have some items there. And your ward improvements of $11.6 million, that's a $700,000 increase. And major parks and neighborhoods, $9.2 million, that's a $700,000 increase. Recreation center improvements, that's a $50,000 increase, it's about $700,000.
Paul, where's the debt service in here? Oh, I'm sorry, I see it.
Yeah, in debt service, there's a number of things. There's citywide debt service, which is the payments on our citywide leases, but also Parks Department has debt relating, going back to a number of years where I think it was F18 that we financed a citywide neighborhood parks improvements, and then the police department also has some existing debt as well. So there are a number of pieces associated with debt service, which is why, aside from, let's say, the increase in the gas tax, you typically don't have much discretionary funds in our base capital budget. In the last couple of years, we've had supplemental appropriations, which have been helpful because everything else has been pretty much tied up.
Roman, are you taking questions now? Can I ask a question now?
Sure, we can take a quick break. Yep.
Thank you so much. I have a question, Director Payne, about the balances. There's so many different departments that have balances. Is that mostly related to positions not being filled, or what would you say that is?
Now, in this case, these are some of the special funds. And I don't think, for instance, the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, where there may be some allocation for some large initiative or something in which either did not get spent or is still in a planning process by the end of the fiscal year. And if it's not, then in order to be able to continue to spend the next year, you have to reappropriate it. I think in a lot of the special funds, where you see that, particularly the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund, you're going to see a lot of those.
Okay.
In the other special fund, half-cent sales tax, some of those are because the revenues outperformed this year. And so we're able to, just like we did with the capital fund, so our half-cent sales tax was up, so we have a positive balance at the beginning of the fiscal year. Well, we appropriate those. Now, if it were down, and we've seen years in which it's down, we will start with a negative balance, so we'll subtract from your appropriation. It just happens to be that this revenues were exceeding this year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Did you have any further questions?
That was my main question. The other one, going back to, I think it is the annual operating plan. It seems that the pie chart was an interesting, I couldn't quite match everything to the pie chart.
Which slide number?
11.
Okay. Okay.
Is everything in the pie chart matching it to the options here? Is everything is represented?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Great. I'm excited about the 3.9 for a new siren system.
Yes. That's been one that's been on the radar screen for a
Right.
while, and that's actually just was fortuitous that we had the extra revenue to do it.
Great, yeah, I'm excited about that. I had thought I had seen that as a potential one, but
Right.
now it's actually in the
Right.
budget going to
Exactly.
happen. Okay, fantastic. That's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, it sounds like we don't have any other further questions from the committee. Director Payne, if you, along the lines of the fund balances, I mean, just kind of going through this, you know, we've got $6.5 million fund balance in the local use tax fund, 8.2 in the sales tax fund, and then you've got kind of all these, you know, these fund balances just throughout all these special funds. Would you be able to prepare a kind of a list of the fund balances from previous year just across the board so we have an understanding of what portion of this year's budget is coming from last year's unspent budget? Okay, thank you.
And again, most of that would be special funds, yeah. In terms
Most of
of,
that.
and I just want to make this very clear. In the general fund, we do not draw from balances at all. And we actually, and I'm going to get to a slide in a moment on the general fund balance.
Great.
It sounds like we have additional question from Alderman Aldrich.
I just got a question, because I do see a lot of, in all of these, I see like the increase. If we had a certain question on like the expense, so how much they received in FY '22 and how much they spent and how much they're receiving in '23 and how much they actually spent, to just be clear on like how much is left on the table. Could we get that from you?
Which specifically, is there a?
No, it's not a specific one. I'm just, even as I was looking at line items, I know we have other departments come up, so we see what we're giving, but not seeing like how much was spent and how much is left on the table. Going back to kind of Alderwoman Schweitzer questions, a lot of money left out there, and just curious about that.
Comptroller's office puts out an annual report each year, which runs what the available balances would be for, let's say, any given department, in terms of what the beginning appropriation was, what the ending appropriation was, and what's the remaining amount left over.
Okay.
So they would be doing, I mean, they do that every year.
Okay, good to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. That's all. Thank you. We can go ahead and continue, Director Payne.
I think we're on slide.
Sounds like we do have one additional question
go ahead.
from the Alderwoman from the 7th.
It's okay. I think maybe I'll just let you get through it, and then I'll ask you my questions at the end,
Okay.
just to be sure that you're not going to answer them on the way.
Very good, very good, very good.
And I noticed we have the comptroller in here. I know Ryan spoke to, you know, we have a new committee. We're moving a little slower than anticipated, Comptroller Green, so please bear with us. Thank you.
Okay, starting with slide 16. I think we're resuming with slide 16. This is just an illustration of the change in personnel totals throughout the various funds. Actually, I see a typo on my 298. We're actually, the 4915, 5943, that's like 28. But overall, we're increasing of 2 positions from 6609 to 6611. Increases in the general fund, up and down. We've got personnel is up by 4, ITSA was up by 2, city council is up by 3, comptroller is up by 2, Parks Recreation are up by 5. We did have some declines. Various departments, Health Division, that was actually a move to the Office of Violence Prevention, and et cetera. Special funds down by 6, grant funds down by 2. Now, the biggest decrease you'll see is enterprise funds, where water was down by 1, but airport was down by 17. So if you look at their TO, you're going to see a decline in that budget. The next slide puts this in historical context for the last 10 years. Overall, looking back, we're down about 72 positions overall in those funds, and we're still down about 85 positions general fund, although that's been actually increases in the last few years. We were down several hundred going back a few years ago. All right, starting on 18, pension costs. Budget pension costs, we've got expected to rise $11.4 million. And as we discussed earlier, this also includes about $3.4 million as the estimated impact from the new uniform pay package. And if you can look at the chart there, you can see that it's been rising over the last few years. That's $104.3 million. And you can see the various components. There you have PRS, which is the police retirement system at $43.4 million. That's a 3.8% increase. FRS and FRP, which are the 2 firefighter retirement plans, they're up $3.7 million. FRS was up $1.2 million. That's the frozen plan. And FRP was up $2.5 million. That's the new plan. They also had an experience study, and this may address one of your questions, Madam Chair, about the increase, because there was an experience study on the fire retirement plan. Every 5 years, the plans go through reviewing their assumptions, what's the assumed rates of returns, what's the mortality rate and all. And this year, they adopted a lower assumed rate at 7% per the actuary's recommendations. And so that results in an increase in the contribution anytime you see that. A couple of years ago, it was the police that did that. So you'll see that periodically. What it tries to do is trying to keep your assumptions in line with actual performance over the years. And ERS at $42.2 million, that's a 4.4% increase. And as I said, that ERS is actually going up. That's about just over 17% of pay, and that's a little worrisome. And then it's rising. And if you look at the projections, it's supposed to be rising, going north of 20% in the future. On slide 19, this gives you an idea of the funded status of each of the 4 cities' plans. A couple of observations. Because of the losses in calendar 22, each of the plans, aside from the frozen FRS plan, it was dipping below 80% of market. 80% of market is typically seen as pretty well funded. I mean, overall, we've been reasonably funded. I think the issue with the pension funds is that their cost is so high, and that's where we are challenged here. If you look, employee retirement system, on an actuarial basis, is funded by 76.9%, but on a market basis is 67.7%. And on the fire retirement plan, the frozen fire retirement FRS 93.5 and is an 85.7. Again, that's the frozen plan. But FRP is 77.6, and on the market is 67.1. And police was 79%, and on the market 72%. What does that market tell you? The valuations are based on smoothing. So in any given year, when you have a loss, they smooth out those losses. And so if the market value is less than the actuarial value, that means there's losses that are yet to be recognized in the valuation, which means that you can look failing a shoot up in the markets. What you're going to end up seeing is you're going to see over the next couple of years, you're going to see increasing contributions. And that's the market basis being lower than actuarial basis is sort of a sign of that. Alderman Aldridge, you asked about the number of employees. These are the active memberships of each of those systems. Would give you a little bit of an idea about the numbers. There were 631 uniformed firefighters, 1,089 uniformed police officers. And aside from some of the employees that do not participate, that are not city employees in the system or our fee offices, there are 3,300 in the ERS system. Okay, amid all the economic uncertainties, I look at this chart, this next chart on slide 20 as actually a positive thing. These are our unreserved general fund balances. And we've made significant progress over the last few years in contributing to an increase in our unreserved balance. Last fiscal year, this current fiscal year was the first year we actually, the Government Finance Officers Association provides a guideline for what a minimum balance should be. And they estimate that at 2 months of operating expenses. That would be 16.6%. Well, in this current fiscal year, we're at 17.2%. So that's the first time we've exceeded that benchmark, and basically we're using that as the new benchmark for what the City of St. Louis unreserved general fund balance. And it has a lot of benefits for the city, not least among them, the cost of borrowing goes down, and then also we've been able to avoid things like issuing trans, which is our tax revenue anticipation note each year. That saves us costs because we're no longer having to borrow to manage cash flow. And so that's a positive development. And it's also important to maintain that and a process for replenishing should we ever dip below. Let's say a big recession comes upon us. Well, one of the things that the rating agencies recognize is that, do you have a plan for getting back to where you were? And just as an FYI, Fitch upgraded the city's credit rating just last week, or the previous Friday. So that's a positive development, and this contributes to this, and so that's a good thing. All right, finally, slide 21. As I mentioned, total budget on $1.32 billion. That's a 7.3% increase. The general fund's at $539.8, a 5% increase. Though revenues exceeding estimates in current fiscal year assume little to no growth in FY24. Some of the budget highlights is $25.4 million to address pay and benefit increases. If you look at all funds combined, this includes the use tax, pension, and all that. That's about $33.4 million related to pay and compensation. The $3.9 million allocated to SEMA for its new siren system. $3.6 million increase in refuse division for projected cost of waste disposal. And then the $2.6 million for the Office of Violence Prevention, consolidating functions from other departments. $2.3 million increase in the comptroller's budget to meet rising insurance premiums. $1.8 million for facilities and fleet service increased costs. And then various increases there, Board of Aldermen's full year cost of staffing. A $700,000 increase in affordable housing related to some funds they had on hand. A decrease of $700,000 in the Board of Elections for their off-election year. The capital budget at $42.2 million, that's an increase of $4.9 million, and it includes the increase in gas tax revenue. So we do have a balanced budget, although we do also anticipate economic uncertainty ahead, so we have tempered our revenue estimates for next fiscal year. And then should it get worse, we do have interest monies from ARPA and marijuana sales taxes and things that we have not incorporated into this revenue estimate yet, but they remain as a backstop.
Madam Chair.
And that's the conclusion of the presentation. I'll take any other additional questions.
Thank you, Director Payne. I'll turn it over to my committee members for questions. Alderwoman from the first.
Thank you so much. I think one of the things that a lot of us are concerned about going forward is the change in earnings tax and the potential to be losing a lot of that revenue. Can you speak a little bit about that?
I can. I don't want to get too much in detail, obviously, because there's litigation and all. But what we've been experiencing, obviously, is the earnings tax is our largest source of revenue, and similar to the payroll tax, it's based on our employers and employees coming into the city or residing in the city and paying the 1%. It's something that we've knocked down in terms of estimates for next year, so we're keeping an eye on the growth. But I should point out that the earnings tax itself even though that's the largest source of revenue, if you start parceling it out, if you start parceling it out, you've got 20% or more of that is corporate. So you take that off the table, and so you've got somewhere less than your total earnings tax. If you take a look at what estimates are for who works in the city, who resides in the city, and who works outside the city to come and work, there are estimates that the Census Bureau provides on that, but they only provide commuters. They provide an estimate of the population that are commuters and such. I can make estimates based on that, although it doesn't have anything to do with dollars. And until you actually get into actual details from dollars, when actually collector revenue provides dollars, I'd be reluctant to state what our potential exposure is on that. I think what's more important is that we identify potential, start keeping your ears out and identify potential ways to fill the gap should we start losing any of our earnings and payroll taxes. I think this budget does not anticipate much growth. Actually, I've got the earnings and payroll down by 3% next year. But I think it's just a matter of identifying, being prepared, and I think we've done that over the last few years in terms of building up our reserves and all, and then identifying potential sources depending on what the actual magnitude of the tax loss would be. I mean, if you're talking about something like $100 million being provided by non-residents and those commuting, and how much of that is at risk? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? If it's 10%, then that's $10 million. If it's 20%, then it's $20 million. And what corresponding source of revenue would you provide, or could we seek to make up that gap? But we don't know the actual numbers right now. And so I think the idea is that we sort of keep your powder dry on some of the sources that we could come up with and deal with that when we actually get some more information on it.
You mentioned in here, we talked very briefly about utilities and water. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, the Water Division has proposed a couple of rate increases that they anticipate in the current fiscal year. So you'll see their budget is up, their revenue estimate is up, and then the city itself receives a portion of whatever gross receipts the department receives, and so that would increase our general fund as well. But the main thrust of that is that they are proposing to address some longstanding capital needs with a rate increase in the current fiscal year. And the idea was that, and I talked to the Director of Public Utilities, the idea was that if those are approved, then you'd have the appropriation in place with Board Bill 1. If it's not, then, and if it doesn't, then there's no harm, no foul in terms of an appropriation, but didn't want to have to reappropriate additional monies if we could get that appropriation in Board Bill 1.
Thank you. That's all my questions for now.
Alderwoman from the 7th.
Hi. Okay, so yeah, I've gotten a lot of, I took some time to do some reading through before, and I saw one of the things that I was happy to see is that we're increasing our budget for water services, which I've gotten a lot of constituents and people in the community that bring that up to me. So I was curious about, is it possible maybe you could just elaborate a little bit about what those increases are for?
Yeah, I would probably have to defer to the Director of Public Utilities on that.
Okay.
They would know far more than I would.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. I think you'll end up saying that for my other questions too, so I'll just leave it.
Alderman from the 14th.
To inquire, I think I'm in Jeff City. Yeah, so when do you think we will start seeing the projections for the marijuana sales tax?
Okay. Well, the tax goes into effect on October 1st, and typically you would see a couple months delay or a gap. So they collect it, they remit it to the state turns around and remits it to the city. So I would expect you to start seeing receipts sometime in December.
Of this year.
Yeah.
And how much was that sales tax again?
Okay, yeah, that's the question. And the latest numbers I'm seeing is the market in total is something statewide, they're projecting something like 1.4 billion. Now, 350 million or so of that was medical, which is not subject to the tax. So let's say you've got $1 billion market. I don't know, if the city of St. Louis were 8% of that or so, and then 3% of that, I mean, you're somewhere around 2.4 million a year, maybe higher, what's difficult to project on this is you don't know what share of the market the city would be. Typically with sales taxes statewide, yeah, you're somewhere around the 8% area. This may be, given the uniqueness of this product, it may be a greater share. I don't know that. But you would probably start seeing actual receipts come in sometime in December.
Mm-hmm. That's all I got right now. Thank you, Director.
Okay. Director, I have a couple of just kind of broad questions. The growth, we're seeing no growth really in revenue over last year, but of course the last year includes a surplus.
Sure.
So, but how do you see that compare with inflation, personnel costs, et cetera? The kind of difference, if you will, in a broad stroke.
Well, the budget itself is up 5%. So that's what's being able, the fact that you had so much growth in this current fiscal year, that 5% growth is able to accommodate what, at least to the extent we could, the increases that we've got in the current fiscal year for next fiscal year. So, but yeah, we're not seeing, the estimates of revenue do not include an increase over that amount, but they are higher than the current year's budget by 5%.
Okay. But generally speaking, we're seeing inflation, personnel costs, et cetera, kind of increasing.
Right.
At a rate that is significant and higher than the increase in revenues, at least for this year.
Well,
because revenues are projected to be kind of flat from last year. I understand that there's a surplus from last year, but
right.
kind of just broadly speaking, I'm looking at whether or not our growth rate is exceeding inflation and personnel costs equal to, kind of just giving us a general forecast.
Yeah, I think some of your increase in personnel costs are being offset by obviously the vacancies that we talked about before. Mm-hmm. But given that in the current fiscal year, the last two fiscal years are actually, this year is sort of a mirror of last fiscal year in which revenues exceeded estimates and expenditures came under budget. Now, whether that's, it's not revenues expenditures aren't coming under budget because costs are going down. That's not the case. Most expenditures are coming under budget because you have vacancies scattered throughout the city government. And so that's what you're seeing. If you were to fill every position within city government, which has never happened, by the way, yeah, you would say, okay, now you don't have enough money to cover every position you've got. But in the at least last fiscal year and this current fiscal year, that hasn't been the problem. I mean, basically, I think the big unknown is whether or not you see a decline in economic conditions such that revenue starts going down. That would be a major shift from where we've been since the pandemic ended, because we've seen growth over and above our normal growth curve. And yeah, as a cautionary note, we've benefited from a lot of one-time monies, at least on ARPA side and some of the surplus capital that have not been used for balancing the budget. Mm-hmm. But should at some point those funds go away, and there might be pressures on how you fill things that we were doing over and above the regular budget with money that is no longer available. So, but from a base budget standpoint, we're up 5%. So that's a significant increase historically in terms of where we are, and it's simply because the revenues have performed the way they have.
And I know you said that we're not using the ARPA funds to fill the general fund.
That's correct.
But there are things that we've discussed, even just today, that we've used ARPA funds for that we would have funded anyway.
I think the biggest benefit you've seen probably is in the area of capital, because obviously a lot of the capital appropriations, whether it be the streets, the calm streets and all of that, we would not have been able to pay for that with our normal sources of revenue, capital revenue, general revenue, whatever. So I think to the extent ARPA has impacted that, I think that's been a positive. And now a lot of the other programming type things under ARPA that were over and above, those are certainly over and above what we would have been able to afford in the general revenue. But general revenue did not rely on ARPA to be balanced. So yeah, it's going to be interesting in the next couple of years as these funds go away. I would say this is that very few positions have been budgeted utilizing ARPA funds, and that's been specifically, there's a purpose to that, is that, hey, these funds are temporary. Once they go away, you don't want to be obligated going forward.
Okay.
I do have one more question.
Okay, Alderwoman from the 7th.
Thank you. So my question is kind of, I think, maybe a little similar to Chair Spencer's, but maybe a little separate. Just around the SEMA and like just kind of planning ahead for things that are coming. I'm just curious about, you know, as far as natural disasters like flooding that we had last year and things like that. Would you say that we're prepared for some of those, you know, some of those things that we can't anticipate, a recession? But really, I'm thinking specifically of natural disasters, that area.
Yeah, I can't speak to the specifics of it. I do know that in the past when we've gotten those, for instance, particular flooding that, and I think they are negotiating with FEMA now to get reimbursements for the city. And when that happens, typically it's not only to address whatever losses you have as a result of a flood or whatever the disaster happens to be, but other things you can do to mitigate future incidents.
Right.
And I think that's where some of the discussions are right now. I can't speak to the individual negotiations between FEMA and the city. I'm not familiar with all those, but I do know from the past one, it was it was a year ago or so, there was, and those are currently underway, I believe.
Okay.
And, you know, so I think, Director, what you mentioned, we should keep our ears open, but I think perhaps once we get through this budget cycle and thinking through, you know, potential recession, other natural disasters, but also the earnings tax. You know, if we could lean on you through this year to kind of explore some other options to fill that hole, should we see it? I think that's a really important piece here, as you pointed out. The earnings tax is the largest revenue source for the city of St. Louis, and having a hole there would be our own natural disaster. You will follow up. You have graciously agreed to kind of provide us with a list of those contingency funds, those balances that are carrying over. We'll lean on the comptroller for that annual report that you mentioned for some of that information as well. And we're grateful for you to come before us this morning. We'll be leaning on you as well through this process. And of course, we need to understand how the budget director's budget is allocated, whether or not you have everything you need in your budget and your department to perform optimally. And so we'll have to have that at a subsequent hearing. With that, and hearing no more questions from the committee, I think recognizing that the comptroller is in the office or in the room. We will move on to the comptroller's office. Thank you so much, Director Payne. We'll be seeing a lot of you moving forward. Thanks.
Thank you. You want a bathroom break? Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay. Madam Comptroller? Good morning. Madam Comptroller, how are you this morning?
I'm good. Good morning to all.
Thank you for being so flexible here with our schedule being a little bit off.
No worries. Good morning, honorable members of the Budget and Public
Public budget and employees.
E and PE.
Committee. All righty. New and improved. We're here to present the Office of the Comptroller's 2024 budget summary. You just received a copy of the summary, and I'll just go through it pretty quickly, and then I'll ask if you have any questions. I have my staff here to answer the questions that you may have. We have in the Office of the Comptroller, 160, which is the main section of the Comptroller's office. As you can see, our current budget is $11.3 million. The municipal garage is also part of the Comptroller's office, and that is at $446,000. The records retention office is part of the Comptroller's office, and that's at $231,000. I'm reading from the summary that I gave you. And then we go to our special funds, which are part of the Comptroller's office, and that gets you to the Gateway Transportation. And this year, we have a budget of $2.43 million. Tax increment financing, otherwise known as TIF, that is at $1.59 million this year, fiscal of '24. And all total, you have for the total fiscal '24, $16 million for the Comptroller's office. And that's a slight increase above fiscal '23 of $3 million.
Comptroller, if we are looking at our line item budget book.
Sure.
And this is what we're going to do for for all departments here. The Comptroller's office is in the general fund 160, so we're looking at page 72, and then you've got 162 and 163, which I do not see.
That's right,
Okay. So that would
beyond
be
160.
90 and 93, okay, so for members of the committee that want to follow along and take a look at the line item detail of the Comptroller's office, that's where we'd find them in the line item budget. Okay,
So I just completed the total budget for the Comptroller's office. The staffing of the Comptroller's office is 97.5. It's a little bit lower than the last fiscal year by roughly 4.5 employees. Rounded as 5.
okay, so
And that completes just a summary. Any questions? You're going to start with the line item, is that?
So for benefit of the committee members, many of whom are new to this committee and how we've organized this budget, which can be kind of complicated, if we were to look at the line item, the annual operating plan, line item detail, this book, on the front end, the Comptroller has 3 funds. Fund 160, which starts on page 72. Fund 162, which is the municipal garage, which starts on page 90. And then the records retention, Fund 163, which starts on page 93.
And that's the
So-
general fund. And then the special funds, you'll start with the Gateway Transportation and then tax increment financing additionally. I'm not sure what pages they are.
And those would be where, Comptroller? Those,
Don't know what pages they are.
okay. So for the general fund, we've got 160, 162, and 163. And then the special funds, Director Payne, can you help us identify where the special funds would be in our budget books?
Item detail. Make it so complicated.
So thorough and so complicated.
Point out a
Yes.
budget summary so that you can, this will be helpful to you. In the very beginning of the book, there are 2 summaries. One is by fund, and one is by department. So,
He's so smart.
so if you look at the one by department, which is the second summary.
And we are looking in the line item detail, Director Payne?
So this is S,
Okay.
S you see at the bottom of S8,
Okay.
there's a listing of all the components of that department. So you're going to see that those are just how many that there are. So when you're looking through them, you'll know which ones they are. Now, if you want to fast forward up to the actual line item detail, like you said, you were there at 70, I believe it was page 72. Okay, so that is the general fund, that main budget. And then you have, you're looking for what, the other two,
And you have like,
which is 162 and 163.
Well, we've got those. We're looking for the, as the comptroller pointed out, the Gateway Transportation Center Fund and the Tax Increment Financing Funds.
Those are some of these are citywide catch-all funds here, so.
So it's a bit confusing to me, looking at S8, the C160, the comptroller, and then underneath there, we've got, is this where the funds for her office are coming from?
Those are her budgets.
Say that again? So like, within the comptroller's fund? Okay, so she's got a sewer lateral repair program under her?
An accounting function related to sewer lateral.
Okay.
can I jump in also?
So you got
Say that
records
again?
retention on page 93. You got the muni garage on page 90.
Okay, the Muni Garage, right. And then, so that would be Fund 160, and then 163 would be following that. But then where are the special funds located? Those two? The Gateway Transportation Center and the Tax Increment Financing Fund.
76, 77, 78.
Lateral sewer, 73. The TIF, that's 70, 72. I'm sorry, 78.
78, 79.
And the Gateway Transportation Center is on page 76.
It'd be nice if they all.
Say that again?
TIF is,
Transportation Center is on page 76. And TIF Administration is on page 78.
Okay. Thank you, Director Payne. We often kind of go through these without real clear understanding of what we're looking at. So I really appreciate this because it can be, it is complicated and a little hard to follow.
And I will add, yeah, this year in particular was more difficult because we had a conversion over to the new accounting system.
The Oracle system.
And it changed not only the fund numbers, so fund numbers, when you used to hear 1010 was general fund, now it's 1,000. So all those fund numbers changed. And then the personnel schedules also changed. So there's going to be some of that within the documents you'll see, and if there's ever a question, let us know. But it was a bit of a challenge accommodating the new accounting system.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have under the comptroller's office, we have the Office of the Comptroller, which would be Fund 160, which is on page 76.
Okay.
Then we have the Municipal Garage, which is Fund 162, which is on page 90. And then we have Records Retention Fund 163, which is on page 93. And then we have the Gateway Transportation Center, which is, did I already lose what page that's on?
70
That's
something?
76 as well.
yeah, 76.
76? Is that the same as the, oh, the comptroller's on 72, okay. And then the tax increment financing, page 78, okay. All right, now that we're clear on what we're looking at, Madam Comptroller, and my vice chair is here, we can proceed. These, I've got these on here.
Hey, you were fine.
So, Madam Comptroller, we are looking at, can you help us understand, we've got your office going from 8.6 million to 11.3. We talked briefly about the increase in in funding for insurance for the major buildings. Do you want to discuss that?
We had quite a few claims, as you know, from the last year's flooding in, I believe it was in July, early July. And we had claims in the Cornahan Court building for water damage. So it affected offices, it affected courtrooms, it affected elevators. We also had a lot of streets throughout the city affected with, as you recall, flash flooding that the city had to deal with, in addition to the sewer folks. They, got involved in a lot of that. But there was a lot of money had to be spent, a lot of water damage. We had something in the Carondelet Recreation Center. There was some needed help after the flood. And so there's lots of claims that added up to anywhere between 15 to 16 million dollars just for that short flood that we had in July. If you all recall how the rain just really came down and lots of damage throughout the city. And so with that type of increase in claims, 16 million, we have had premium increase. And so those premium increases are reflected in the fiscal '24 budget, which those increases are in our budget, in the comptroller's budget. And so that's a large portion of the $3 million increase. Of course, we have some increases having to do with the salary increases. Throughout the city, every employee is getting a salary increase. And of course, you'll see that reflected in our salary accounts throughout our budget for fiscal '24. I'm not sure what the total amount of the increase is as percentage, but I'm sure the director pointed out that there was, I believe, something above 3% for salary increases throughout the city, and that's also reflected in our budget as well.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller. Do you have any increase in staffing?
Actually, we have a decrease overall. Overall, we're showing a 5 employee decrease right now.
You have a 5 employee decrease?
Yeah, and it's chiefly coming from the records retention. We've got new scanning mechanisms where the records retention department retains all vital records for the city records, financial records for the city. And our office in records retention found that we could have a reduction there. And so that's part of our reduction.
Okay, Madam Comptroller, if you don't mind, could you give us a broad stroke of what all is under your purview as the Comptroller? We've got these 5 funds, obviously your office, the municipal garage, the records retention. Can you just give us kind of just a quick overview of kind of all the things that are under the purview of the Comptroller?
Well, as the Chief Financial Officer, of course, I have the Office of Managing the city's record keeping, financial record keeping, paying the bills for the city, and doing all of the financial reporting for the city, doing all the bond issues for the city, and then anything financial, I'm protecting the credit, like I said earlier, and we do the respond to surveillance from all credit rating agencies that will come through. And the director just told you just a moment ago that Fitch, which is one of the credit rating agencies, increased our credit rating just last week. We had another credit rating from S&P, Standard & Poor's, last week, and we expect to hear from them. And the municipal garage, as some of you park in, which is catacorner to City Hall on Clark, is managed by the Comptroller's Office. Records retention, which is in the basement of this building, City Hall, is managed by the Comptroller. The Gateway Transportation Center, which is on 16th Street, and you have the Amtrak Train and Greyhound Bus, who are the major tenants and actually pay the big portion of the operations for that center. That makes it a special fund, as well as the Comptroller's Office manages the TIF operation, which is also managed by funds from the operation of TIF, the tax increment financings. So that is generally kind of a broad view of what we do. I'm sure I'm leaving some things out.
And broadly,
Auditing. Thank you very much. The staff, the Comptroller's Office is the accountant and auditor for the city, and we do have a large internal audit staff, and we do, you know, the finances for the city. That's our, you know, I'm an independently elected office, independent of the mayor, independent of the legislative branch, and charged with protecting the city's credit and making sure that our finances are in, you know, good, that they're good, in good shape.
and with the exception of the records retention department, which went down, as you pointed out, because of some automation and some technology investments, it looks like, broadly speaking, just as a quick overview, the requested budgets, the proposed budgets reflect similar to the proposed, the requested budgets from your office. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. And so generally speaking, would you say that with the budget before us, that your departments can operate optimally and in a way that you feel confident in your, in the service to the city? In other words, do we need to, do you need us to hear any specific requests or omissions or things that we could?
That's a good question. I appreciate that. We do have, as the director, or Paul Payne just mentioned, a new accounting system, Oracle, and we're experiencing quite a few snafus, I'll call them, and it's troubling throughout the city, and we, as the Comptroller's Office, are stepping in where we can to be an assist. The actual choice of the new accounting system, as you know, was the previous administration, and with that, we are working very hard to lift up what we found to be some of the issues, and, you know, we dove right in to try to pull that up. So that the reason I mentioned that is because we may see a time where more finances are needed to help with some of the issues that we're finding. We have online just in 1 month ago, the payroll module. And I understand there's quite a few problems with payroll issues, employee payroll issues. So I encourage you all to look at your paychecks every 2 weeks so that you can make sure that you're reporting to us any kinds of things that you're finding that's not correct.
Well, congratulations on the increase in our rating system, and with that, and the hard work that went into that, Comptroller Green. With that, I'll turn it over to my committee members for questions. Alderwoman Boyd.
I apologize. I was late. Ironically, I was here early, and then I went back out. So anyway, first, let me congratulate you, because normally you do come to us, and you always come with a reduction of staff. So you always try to streamline your budget. But I guess my question I'm asking, because I heard about the payroll, so are you all having any other hiccups when it comes to the contractors in regards to them being paid?
We have had accounts payable problems as well. That was implemented a year ago, March, and throughout the whole year, there's been one problem after another, and we've corrected as much as we've seen that need to be corrected. The largest thing that we're undertaking right now is to reconfigure the contract module as it relates to the procurement module. We had some of these, big-time consultants that consulted us and then we ended up with something that didn't match well with our operations. Now we're trying to revamp. We've got a couple of other consultants that reviewed what the ones from the former administration, and those consultants said our configuration for the contract module was not correct.
Okay.
And so we reconfiguring that, and we're on it, and every single day we're on point to try to improve it, every single day trying to improve it. So yes, we've had outside vendors say, they didn't get their payment in a timely manner and things like that over this last year when we did the implementation, of course, and then, of course, the court was so outraged. The judges sued us, and so now we're right now looking at a settlement because they understand it has to do with the new system, the Oracle system, and so they, were understanding as long as they could, and then they sued us so that we could get the message that fix it. So we're fixing it. And once again, it was a choice of the former administration in terms of how it's configured and from the consultants. If we told them that we wanted it a certain way, the consultants knew better, then they would have told us, right? Okay, so that's what we're faced with, and we did have a couple of reviews by one consultant was KPMG. They came in, they said, oh, gee, this is kind of wacky, but, you need to fix it. And then another Armanino came in and told us the same thing independently. So you have two outside consultants looking in at whatever this other consultant is telling you, and they're both saying the same thing, that we were sold something that was kind of wacky, and so we're fixing it.
So do you see, I know you said you had a reduction of staff, so do you see that you will have to come back to try to bring in staff to assist you with helping, your staff?
And that's a good question, too, because what we have actually is a reduction in one part and an increase in another part. And going to the increase is monitors. Monitors is something that we learned that we needed, and I think some of that was going to be in our budget, and then in the budgets where the monitors are going to go in terms of the cost.
Okay.
We used to have monitors until HUD came in back in 2015, I believe it was, and did a study, citywide study, y'all remember that? And we had monitors, and HUD said we should not have monitors. What the importance of monitors are is they monitor the grant activity in the department, the subrecipients, to make sure all the federal regulations are followed. And that's very important because you get these turnovers, but if you got a monitor, which is a steady person who understands federal regs and the grants and how they're followed and the ins and the outs, that gives some stability to a department like the health department or the police department, who depends heavily on federal grants. They've got someone from the comptroller's office that's right there and saying, okay, here's how this grant should be funded, or here's how this payment should go, and here are the regulations that is followed, no matter who the employee is, with the turnover of a public, employee. So
Right.
that's very important. So we're re-implementing monitors once again in those heavily departments that use grants very heavy, and that's your health department. They get lots of federal grants. Okay, I know you all know that. And then in the police department, lots of federal grants, and Health and Human Services, and some other departments across, like the judicial branch gets some grants. So we want to make sure, from a financial point of view, that the federal regulations that govern how grant monies are spent are covered by monitors, and they're there to help to make sure that federal regulations are followed in all of those different areas. And so that's one of the increase in employees. The reduction is in the records retentions, where records are being scanned a different way than the old way, and which call for fewer employees.
Okay. All right, well, thank you so much. The next person, Alderwoman Schweitzer, did you have any questions?
Thank you. Chairwoman Boyd, you asked a lot of the questions I had. I think the concerns that I've been seeing, Comptroller Green, thank you so much for being here today, has been around the Oracle system and getting things paid and moving through. I know a lot of the ward capital things that I've allocated funds for, it's, waiting for something to be signed and so. Can you speak a little bit to just the plan for improving that?
Well, I have two of my top employees that can help me with that. I've got my Deputy Controller, Beth Fitzsimmons is here. I've got Jason Fletcher, who is my support manager, and the reason I bring their names up, they sit on the committee on a regular basis. It's an Oracle committee, and they talk to these consultants that I was telling you about. And so they can tell you what the plans are for the corrections and of all of the different activities and things that we've been finding. So if y'all don't mind joining me.
Hi. So when Oracle was designed.
Identify yourself, please.
Sorry.
Identify yourself.
Sorry, I'm Beth Fitzsimmons, I'm Deputy Comptroller. Okay. And this,
Jason Fletcher.
Okay, I was like, I know who you are, they might not know.
Okay. So when the Oracle system was designed, we started to implement a project module of the Oracle system. And so the wards, if you remember correctly, in the past, the wards were set up as just part of the regular general ledger, and each department's responsible was given the funding per responsibility. In other words, it wasn't like we set it up in the general ledger as this park and then that park and then that park. That was all controlled by the Board of Public Service, the detail. We did it by department in our general ledger, okay? So that's the difference of what you're seeing now. What we have now is a two-piece project module with the wards, where when you set aside money for a parks project, it's put in your ward's project under parks, or BPS, or streets, or whatever category you enter. Then when BPS brings us a contract, that money's moved over and actually encumbered. So the system is not the reason for any type of delays that you're experiencing or anything like that. Now, of course, in the past month, we've kind of, slowed it down a little bit here because now we have new wards. We have to figure out how to take the old money and reformulate it and determine which projects in which ward and that type of thing. So it'll be, going forward, you'll be using your 14 wards, but we have to figure out that cash balance. So in the Oracle, we do have a setup that works for it, but we work according to how the departments encumber your money.
It does. I will just end up hearing, that's in the comptroller's office right now.
We get that a lot with this new system.
Okay. So that's, what's that?
It really, the system is you can see it coming along. Of course, any new system with the magnitude that this is going to have, like Jason called it, growing pains going with it, and I think we see it coming along. Yeah. There's going to be issues. There were issues with the old system too, type idea. But it's just getting everybody acclimated to changing the way they do things.
Got it.
So, we're like, one of our decreases in staff was we used to have people, you'd send in a blue voucher, and we had maybe 4 different clerks entering all that stuff, all data entry. Well, we don't need them anymore because it's entered at the department level now. So that was another thing. But then we also increased another payroll clerk. We, added some fiscal officers to help my main 2 project managers. They're an assistant to help them with closing the books, because a lot of what used to be on ITSA seems to be falling back on the comptroller's office now. So it's just training and that type of thing that we're needing.
I was really interested in hearing more about monitors. So monitors for people, that's a position. A monitor is a position of someone who
The internal audit section.
Yeah, so we'll get 2 more monitors this year. They'll do fiscal and programmatic monitoring for all the grant monies we receive.
Okay.
We've had them in the past. We had quite a large area of them in the past. Over time, that section kind of dwindled with funding, but we're ramping back up.
And that's
especially
just
with
for
all the
grant funding?
we receive.
Interesting. So if a project comes through and is funded by general revenue and, signed off, everybody signed everything, the department itself is responsible for checking that everything is done to what they had asked to be done. The comptroller's office doesn't get involved in that piece.
Right, yeah, they should certainly do their own monitoring as well, but we will do an additional monitoring as we do our audit plan for the year.
And it's more that everything is spent as it says, as it's said that it will be, not that the work is done the way we'd asked for it to be done.
Right, right.
So there's no one in the comptroller's office who monitors that back end, like this contract went out, it was,
Well,
they're
actually,
saying,
can you ask that question one more time?
yeah, I'm trying to get a better sense of, in the streets department, of course, there's street inspectors. So if someone has a street project that's finished, the street inspector is supposed to show that it's been finished and we can check it off and so in general, is every department responsible for if they have a contractor they're working with or some
I see,
how much does the comptroller get involved with that piece?
Yeah, we monitor both, actually. So we monitor that they're spending the funds the right way, but also that the contractor actually carries out the work they say they're going to do, or the subrecipient. So we monitor all of that. We do, between 50 and 75 audits a year.
But
So-
but not on a.
Not on a
consistent
project
basis.
basis.
Right.
This is in their auditing, internal auditing process.
Right.
Okay, so yes, if somebody had finished a street, it would be up to the street department, RBPS. They would sign off on it, and they would submit the invoice to us with the director or whoever is their authorized signature, saying this was done completely correct, and we take that and pay off of that. So no, we don't go out and look at the street too.
Okay.
That is totally their area of expertise.
Interesting. Okay, thank you so much.
Is that all?
Yes.
Alderwoman from the 7th?
I don't think I have any questions for you.
Alderman from the 14th?
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, I want to say thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Comptroller, for being here. Thank you for continuing to keep our city fiscally responsible, even to the point where the budget director said that we went up in a credit rating. So thank you and your staff, because I know it takes a team to run an efficient office as you've been running for the city of St. Louis. So thank you. And I guess it's more of a comment. Want to piggyback off of Alderwoman Schweitzer and Vice Chair Boyd. If there's any way that we could be a help as the system is changing, since I'm only been here a couple weeks, but in that short time I've received just several emails around lack of payment with contracts going back to about a year, and I know that can cause a burden if we want to do more projects in the future of contractors saying, oh, I want to go work for that city because they ain't paying on time. So as we are talking about staff, I know we talked about the monitors part. Is there any, and I see, and if I'm wrong, please correct me because I'm new and learning. It looks like the comptroller office went down too, and then the records retention, the comptroller explained that very well, why they went down because of scanners and stuff like that. Is there any needed support staff to do that, guarantee that these contracts can go through? I hear monitors, which sounds.
Okay, I'm going to cut
No.
right to it.
Okay.
And
Well, go ahead,
where we
Comptroller.
may need an increase would be professional services, where we may need to have better folks to help guide us with the contract module. The discussion of that has been going on between my office and the mayor's office. And what I'm saying is, I mentioned that the Oracle was presented by the former administration, and their professional advisors that come with that. That's, what's the name of those folks? Accenture? Accenture, it just happens to be their name. And I say it like that because I know we're on camera, and I'm not trying to pull any lawsuits or anything like that, but they are helping us. And then we've had other professionals who have advised us that the configuration is not one that is the most efficient for paying the bills. So we are now in the process of reconfiguring on the advice of KPMG and Ormanino. I have to name all three. That is in writing, and we have the backup proof because we asked, once Oracle came online, look at where we are and tell us exactly what you think. And that was KPMG. And they gave us 4 points, 4 top points. The fourth point was the contract module that they thought we needed. When we asked Ormanino 1 year later, so 1 year later, Ormanino, we're having problems and people are complaining. Help us figure out why. Ormanino says, well, gee, golly, if you had a contract module, then you would, so we found out that the contract module has been purchased, but it's been configured into a procurement module. Now, procurement has to do with supply department, but not all contracts go that way, right? So then if you're pushing them through that way, that's going to cause a delay. So we were advised formally that that was okay and that it wouldn't slow things down. And I'm finding out, as you all are telling us, it has slowed things down. And so, not right now, not right now, because we kind of differ slightly on contracts versus procurement and all this. And I have to go with the professionals that you know, if independently they're saying the same thing, then I'm going straight forward. So the question is, what do we need? We probably need to spend some money with the professionals that have got us to the point to where it makes sense and how to move us forward. And that would be a professional services, that we may have to increase that dollar amount in our budget to contract with the Ormanino, the KPMG, so that they can help move us forward. That's what I'm saying. Now, to continue to spend the same money on the same people that have caused us the delays, it's just not working. And that's the Accenture people who they say if they stay 6 months, it's $1 million. And that's what we've been pouring the money in. Every 6 months, $1 million, $1 million. And it was going down in a rabbit hole, as you know, the proverbial rabbit hole. And then we're trying to pull our heads out of the rabbit hole, right? So I know that there's contract issues with the Accenture people, and I'm sure you could come and speak now, because I know you're going to talk about that, because
No,
it's
that's what I was
so
gonna talk about.
complicated.
What I was going to talk about is what you have to realize is the comptroller's office can only pay the bills as they're invoiced to us.
Okay, that's a
If the
good point.
department doesn't submit the bill to us, we have no way of paying that. So I know we found that a lot. And what we're doing to try to help departments is every Wednesday morning, they can come to our conference room and ask for help. I don't know how to do this. This didn't go through right. Why is this stuck, and that type of thing. So we found that there's all these training options for these departments, but we don't hold up bills. It's only according to what we get that we can pay.
Okay, so
I don't want to think like it's us holding up the bill.
and she's absolutely right, and I want to kind of make that make sense. As she told you earlier, is that there were employees in the comptroller's office that were keying in the vouchers, right?
Legacy, right.
In the old system. Now those things are keyed in at the department, right? The difference is if it's a new system, not only a new system, but it's a new practice and it's a new duty that the whole city has to get used to doing, right? So if there's an invoice that used to be sent manually, you handle it, and we did that. Now we're telling them to handle it. Well, there's a training issue there, right? That person said, I didn't have this duty before, why am I not getting paid more money, right? That's citywide. This is Oracle, that's how Oracle works, right? That makes sense? I need them nods.
Yes.
So that, okay. Okay, so you're following me on that. And so that's part of the problem. When they say it's in the comptroller's office, not technically. If they hit the send button from their office to send that voucher through, it is in our office, right?
And I'm not saying there isn't glitches, and there's not things that, call it a rabbit hole, that it gets stuck in the system, that we have to find it, but
Right.
we have to be told the part too.
Exactly. So we're constantly looking at how to make sure that we have a process, because it's all about process, to make it a more efficient process than what we had in the past. That's why you get a new computer in the first place, is to make sure that's an upgrade. And this one has really held us back because it has not been a good, and I'm going to call it, the professionals who sell you the stuff, right? They should train you better, and we
Right.
haven't had that.
Right.
We have not had that, and that's been the Accenture people who promised that they were the top-of-the-line people to make this work, and they have not, and I'm just have to say that.
Right.
Because that's what the other people told us. They were professionals telling other professionals, and we have to get people in that tell us what we have.
Right.
And they had never seen the configuration like that, and they had just never seen that. And so that was the one problem, and then the other problem, as Bev was saying, we don't even get the invoices because the people are afraid of if they're going to make a mistake, and then when they do it right, they think it's right, then there's a glitch in the system. And that glitch in the system is how it's configured going through. For example, the contract, whatever the contract is, the way it's configured, it has to be put in as a requisition. You hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
And
we
so
hear
if you're a smart person and you know you got a contract in your hand, but you have to call it a requisition, so that's another kind of weird out thing that you have to say, wait a minute, well, it's a new system, it's a new system. But then when they told us it's not a proper configuration, you know, the other two consultants said, oh, this is not right. So now we're fixing it so you can type in, and in your hand is a contract, and on the screen it says contract, and then you're ready to roll, right? You would not think that there's something wrong with you when you have a contract, but it's looking for a requisition. You get it? Okay, so that's what was happening, you know, from March till now. And now we're going to make it look like what it is. When you log on with a contract, to enter a contract, it'll say contract. Enter your contract, and it'll be less steps. And so we hope that going forward it's going to be better.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The city's come a long way. The old system was 40 years old.
40 years old.
So it's, and a lot of the stuff that you hear is really old. It's from when we first went live.
Okay.
As of today, it's
Okay.
really a robust system. It's really doing a lot better now.
Great. And Jason is on the case. Like, how many meetings are you in a week?
They're slowing down now, but now we're ramping back up for the contract side of it. So I don't know, 1 or 2 meetings a week.
Okay, so we're going to promise you that it's going to get better. And that's what I'll stand here and promise it's going to get better, and as we continue to move forward. But I want you also to promise to continue to let us know about any problems that you're hearing about, whether it's payments to contractors, whether it's your own paycheck or other folks' payments. Just let us know what you're seeing so that we can take those steps immediately to correct them.
Yeah.
Okay? Any other questions?
Well, I'll just say with that, continuing my line of question, I appreciate that explanation. Like I said, new. It sounds even probably more confusing on your end, so I appreciate trying to figure it out. And I will, on my end, if there are contractors or contract questions, Jason, I'm sure I can find you somewhere in City Hall to be able to bring that forward. And I guess before we just close, so again, going back to the need, will there need to be additional staff?
We are going to probably look at that within the fiscal year, but before this fiscal year closes, I'm pretty sure we're going to increase the professional service line item for whatever the amount. We're going to figure that out because we have some additional requests from Armanino to help actually staff. And what that is, these would be professional folks that are coming in temporary, you know, Armanino staff, to come and sit with payroll staff and make sure that whatever problems they have to work out, they'll have their staff right then and there to fix it. And then as the contract module gets implemented, we want to have staff to come in and help so that we'll have more hands-on than we've had in the past. So you're right on point with your question in terms of additional staff. It may mean that what we need to do is hire more professional staff, whereas we had clerk staff to enter. Now we would need the professional staff with the knowledge of how to go around and help other departments. And that has not been done because we're depending on our own regular staff that already have a job, and then they have the additional job of training. But we may just need a whole set of trainers to go out. We've got the monitors. We knew we needed that. That's big, and one of the big reasons for the monitors is the amount of the monies that are federal dollars. It's a huge amount, as you know, and that means a huge number of subrecipients exist. And so some people never saw a federal dollar in their life. Well, do they have a proper staff that's going to follow the federal regs to spend it? And if they're not there, that's what a monitor is there for, to say this is how it's done. Gotcha. And you have to cross this T and dot that I so that this dollar is spent properly.
Gotcha. And I'm wrapping up. So it sounds like we'll need professional staff to help all the departments in the city with payroll, and then we'll need additional staff to try to work on the contract system.
Yes.
So it's going to be
We're going to look at exactly what the needs are and adjust the budget that we've presented.
Okay. Thank you, Comptroller.
Thank you.
Is that all?
That's all, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller. So then, if I'm understanding correctly, so the budget that we have before us is not optimal for your operations, or is?
Thanks to your questions, thanks to your observation, and thanks for you being very honest with us, letting us know that you've got glitches out there. Your constituencies are complaining about not getting paid, and so we need to know that. And so what our steps that we were saying that we would take was to hire professional staff, but that's temporary, but we think that we may need to add more professionals to our own city TO and add those in addition to monitors. So we're going to look at that in the short few weeks and adjust the budget that's before you to add staff, to take care of what needs to be taken care of regarding the Oracle system. That's what we know, for sure. So the first step would be to add staff that Armanino has actively asked that we would add to come and help with the payroll problems. That's first. And I think we already have a figure of 40-something thousand.
We have a change order for
40,000. And so that's immediately, and then and that's 2 employees that they said that's going to sit with our payroll staff. And then we haven't even touched what the amount is for the contracts module. And that's going to be an additional few $100,000 or tens of thousands. That's just for outside professionals. But then the idea is, what do you do long-term? And that is to add staff that replaces the staff that used to just key in the invoices, but now the staff has to go out to different departments because the departments are keying in invoices instead of the comptroller's office, and those guys don't have training, proper training. Right.
It sounds like the alderman from the 14th has an additional question. Alderman?
Just one more question, and this could be I can get it off record. Do we know how many, and I know we changing system, how many contracts are outstanding?
I don't know how many would be outstanding. We don't have any, when you say outstanding, you're talking about that's not processed?
Not processed, not paid contractors. Like I say, in starting a whole line of question is contractors, and I'm learning maybe it's through different departments.
Here's how you look at that. You got processing of contracts, and that's done. You know, we process those, but then the key that a contractor is looking for is getting paid, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of their invoices are paid and some of them are not. And that's probably what we're running into.
So
A lot of that was originally when we went live with the accounting system, which is more than a year ago now. Payroll just went live, which is where the immediate concern is. It's only been a couple pay cycles for that.
gotcha. So to the,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I was gonna say, so to that invoice, do we know how many invoices?
No, not
are-
until it's reported.
Okay.
But I think we can look at, if they're entered, we can look at what's outstanding, what's entered, and I could get that to you.
I appreciate it. That's okay.
What's ever entered and not processed fully, because Oh, I'm so glad
You got some
she's
backup.
here. Our expert, she's been sitting in the back. Thank you for coming up here. Oh, my God. Hit it.
Okay, just to give, I'm Nancy Wigan. Just to give a little perspective of how we really, like Bev said earlier, we don't have control or record of how many outstanding invoices are out there unless they enter it in the system. Now, if it's entered in the system, we recently made some changes that on, like every 2 days, we're checking what's stuck in the system to make sure that that turnaround get fixed and paid the following day. So in reality, actually, when we were in Legacy, where people have to walk these blue vouchers to our office, then manually entered by our data entries, it takes like 5 to 7 business days to get the check out. But with Oracle, if it's entered right, 2 to 3 days, the checks goes out. Now, like I said, we are continuously trying to figure out a way how to help department for invoices that's stuck in the system. Another thing is for contracts. Sorry, Ms. Green. I'm trying to explain. For contracts, we also don't have like a number, unless it's already in our office, we don't know what's out there. Because the process of our contract is departments, right? Then it goes to the city councilor. Once the councilor signs, it comes to our office. Then that's the only time we know what contracts is outstanding. Just to give an example, we have a lot of contracts that I know it's kind of unfair to vendors. Sometimes I deal with a lot of federal grants because I'm over federal grants. And we have subrecipient agreements that they already provided the services almost a year ago. We just got the contract.
It's got the contract or invoice?
So we don't know.
So where's the breakdown? Where was the breakdown if it was a year?
At the department level.
Okay.
So
We
we,
often see contracts that are here for the comptroller's signature that are months past the start date of the contract. The contract will say it starts in July 1, and we'll get it in September.
Can you tell us, do you have a list of those?
I mean, I can.
Those departments.
I
That
don't
would-
have one offhand, no.
Okay, I mean, if you could provide us with that list, I mean, that would be very problematic. The Board of Aldermen, excuse me for interrupting, but we are getting involved in a lot of communication from vendors who are not getting payment, and they're looking to us for a remedy. And I think it would be pertinent for us to share some of that communication with you, but also, I mean, we're trying to solve the problem for, as the alderman from the 14th pointed out, vendors who aren't getting paid. So, we, understanding the departments that are failing to provide that information to the comptroller's office would be very helpful for our understanding and seeking remedy here. Understanding if the comptroller's office needs additional budget for funding, Comptroller Green, if you go through that and determine what might be needed for that, you're in the unusual position of also having been one of the 3 members of the Board of Any who presented this budget to us as it is. So I think what I'd like to ask you to do, in addition to providing a recommended set of additional funding, recommend where we would get those funds from within the budget as was presented to us by the Board of ENA, so that we can have an understanding of where those funds could come from. And as quickly as possible, because as you know, we're moving through this process fairly quickly. Alderman, did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think that answered, and I think I'm done. If I am, I'll go offline. I would just say to echo, I think if there's a way for us to be helpful to know, like, is it what department hasn't got what to you guys, so that we could be a help and like Alderwoman, or Chairwoman Spencer said, even in a short period of time, been getting emails after emails about vendors. I mean, I think the whole board did. Potentially was supposed to have been a meeting a day, but vendors reaching out to Alder people because they're upset that they haven't been paid for over a year.
And it would be helpful for you guys to copy us on any of those questions so that we can follow through. Because it is very true, as Nancy stated, a lot of the things that would be delayed. It's really held up at the department level. And so we get, it's kind of like a cliche to say it's at the comptroller's office, and that's been for years. But when we look into it, we'll find that that clerk has it still on her desk, no matter what the department is, and it hasn't been pushed through, and then we're the ones that will push it through or walk it through in order to get an invoice paid. So if the contract is here, but they're trying to put an invoice in, they've got to get the contract done first, you see.
Okay.
Even though the work started, you know, and they want to get paid, you have to have a contract, because we don't have anything showing that we should have an invoice.
Yeah.
And then we say, well, where's the rest of it? And they go, oh, yes, right here. And that happens a lot. And like they were telling you, it could be like last July that they started the work and did the work, and now the vendor wants to get paid, but the contract is still on the desk. And that's been since my whole career here. That's been a problem.
And all contracts go through the comptroller's office?
Yes.
Is there a list of contracts that the city has? Where could that list of contracts be found?
Register has everything.
The register? Okay, so all,
The register has everything that's been processed. They would not have anything that's on somebody's desk.
so the registrar's office has the list
Archives every.
of city contracts, okay. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn it, one more round of questions from the committee members. Alderwoman Boyd, did you have any questions?
And I guess to piggyback, because I'm hearing it, and I know all of us did get the email, but I know that even with grants, Prop S was one of those issues. The people weren't getting paid. And so and I applaud you all, because you're biting this elephant one piece at a time. You're trying to figure out how to clean this up. So with that part, are you all looking at that also on how you can clean that part up? Okay.
Absolutely.
I think that's been, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I think we're doing really, we made a lot of improvements as well. I'm talking about the city as a whole.
Okay.
Again, a lot of what you're hearing, we did a second round of training for eight or 10 weeks training the comptroller. Trained every office for a second round. This was 6 months ago, 7 months ago. So a lot of what you're hearing, I think, is ready to be addressed.
Okay.
It doesn't mean there's not issues, but I think a lot of it's been addressed.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's one view, Jason's view, and then, you know, you guys have other views, and if you have information from less than 6 months ago,
Yep.
we want to know about it, because we don't
Okay.
want anything to be in, you know, in hiding or anything. Just let us know.
Right.
Because we're the office that can, you know, contact the other offices and ask them, where is the contract related to this particular payment that you're trying to send through? And
Right.
then then they'll say, oh, it's over here, we didn't know that we had to do that first, or something to that effect. But a monitor, once we get those guys out or dispatched, then they would be very helpful to that employee that just got there and not knowing that the contract that was left by the previous employee that was there didn't get processed. You got to process the contract first.
Yeah, and I can speak to that, because when we went through that last year, and I did contact the comptroller, and instantly the contracts started moving out. So it was a glitch. I just didn't know where the glitch was.
Part of it is
Yeah.
the connection, the employees in the other department, because if you got medical professionals or human service professionals, they're not accounting professionals.
Right.
And they may or may not have proper staff to understand that you process your contract and then you process your invoices after the contract has gone through the system, so that the system can recognize that a payment is going to be coming from this particular contract that's been processed.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Okay, Alderwoman from the first.
Thank you so much. I think where I'm getting a little bit confused is understanding the just flow of everything through the office. So having some sort of chart where it's like project, what happens next, through payment, so that we can understand where things get held up and what the issue might be for solving it.
That's, from an automatic point of view, your best is to know what is the subject of the project? Is it a medical? Does it, does it come from the health department? A Ryan White grant, for example. That's where you would check for that kind of a project. If you're talking about a streets project like paving, the streets department, and if you know who that contractor is, then they would also know. Because the comptroller doesn't make the decisions of the actual work program or process. We look for the approval of any type of work that you tell us, whatever department, you say, this is a project, we approved it, then they tell the comptroller, you pay it. That's the whole process. It's that simple. And we've got all of these departments, and this is how you run a city. You got your police, your fire, your streets, your refuse, and the courts, and all of them. Where would the alderman start? Is at the department. Okay, I've got a vendor. Their name's, whatever, and they want a payment. Where's their contract? And what is going on? That department was probably going to say comptroller's office, because that's where the payment comes from. But the question is, you're asking, where's the contract? And that's what you have to kind of bird dog. And that's what a monitor is going to help us do. We will be able to get people, I said monitor, but I meant any new employees that are dispatched, because that's what we're finding out that we need. We need the dispatch people to go out to the different departments and get those contracts that may be on their desk, that type of thing. So is that more helpful?
Yeah, it is. It's interesting to hear your perspective on this, just finding out, where are things being held up, what can alders do about it, if there's a physical thing sitting on someone's desk somewhere.
And that is reality.
Right.
That is my reality since I started in this job. And the most heard phrase is, it's in the comptroller's office.
Right.
And then when we hear that, we go, okay, let's go get it. Let's go find it. That's our normal thing to do. And we all know this. Every person that ever worked in the comptroller's office, we get ready. She puts on her heels, and she goes, I put on my tennis, and we go. We go get the contract, because they have not given us the information, and we see that there's a bill, and there's an issue. There's emails saying all these bills that need to be paid, and then the contract was signed by one side in probably July of 2021, and then the other side, and it's sitting there. And then there's, so, comptroller, we're sorry. That's it. It's not rocket science. It's just like at home, and Ameren calls you. Well, the bill is sitting right there.
Sure.
And my checkbook's over here. And if you can get those two things to meet, boys, Ameren's gonna love you. If you get there, either to their office or to the mailbox. It's that simple in the city as well, except for the departments are spread out all over. That's how it works.
Thank you.
Okay? Okay.
Alderwoman from the 7th.
Hi, Comptroller Green.
Oh, there, how are you?
Good. First, I just want to thank you. I can tell that you are very prepared, are very familiar with all the issues, have the recommendations ready, and are just getting straight to it. And also, I really commend you and your staff and your office for going the extra mile, going to the individual departments. And I think for me as a new alder, one of the things that I dislike about a lot of the operations we seem to have in place is how many times, either as alders or as offices, individuals have to go and kind of keep the system running. I think when we have efficient systems, they run themselves, and it's not compliant on you or your staff going to get it or one of us elevating it. So I'm really interested in whatever recommendations you have, especially because you've been having regular interactions with these departments, of things they can implement or things that we may be able to help encourage to put in place that make us have healthy, efficient systems where it's not up to the individual to keep it moving. So I just want to make sure that I kind of extend that I would really.
Appreciate that.
Yes.
I do, and I'm grateful for the questioning so that we can leave here and work on how we can lift up the efficiency throughout the city and make this system work, because we know we all deserve to have a better working system, and we've been doing this for the last year with Oracle. And it isn't working until we have to dive in and make it better.
Yes.
So I want to apologize that you guys, the new guys, come in with Oracle that seems to be such a horrific system. It is. But we are going to make every effort to make it better.
Yeah, and I can say too, what feels good to me is the honesty that seems all around from every person I spoke to and an acknowledgement of what the problems are. Like, that actually makes me feel good. I think we all know a lot of things are antiquated and need to be updated, and we know what they are. We can start working on the solutions, and I think, obviously that's a part of our job. So it actually makes me feel good when I hear, veterans, senior members, staff people saying, oh, this is this problem. These are some of the solutions we have in mind. My other point is I was just curious about when you may have those figures ready on what the professional services staffs may be, since, we're in
Couple of
budget.
weeks.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
Alderman from the 14th. Want to wrap us up?
Just again, I want to thank you, Comptroller, and your staff. This was very helpful, especially being a new member of the city budget. And I heard your line of questioning with Alderwoman and Alderwoman Schweitzer. I think where I was also getting confused is when you continue to say the invoice sits on a desk. I was like, wait, what desk? Is it Department of Forestry desk? Is it Department of and if it is sitting on a desk, is there a system to know that it's sitting on a desk so we can be your hound dogs and go, so you ain't got to put your sneakers and heels on and we're going to make it happen for you. But that's my comment.
Thank you.
And Alderman from the 14th, I appreciate you bringing up the issue of the contracts. I think this was a really fruitful discussion. If you don't mind, would you forward the set of communication that was referenced here to the comptroller and her staff?
Absolutely.
So that we can have that so they can be aware of those conversations. And then, Comptroller, I wanted to thank you again for coming before us, answering all of our questions, preparing recommended changes, and making sure that we all got paid on Friday. I don't know about y'all, but I checked when you suggested that we do that. I did get paid on Friday, so thank you so much.
And that's real.
Real quick, Madam Comptroller, if you could get me somebody's email, I'll make sure I get that.
We'll make sure we've got.
Okay.
We've got all
I can
that.
send that to you.
Right. We don't have. I didn't get Nancy's last name, but we'll make sure we
Nancy?
have everybody here.
Regan. And Nancy, by the way, is shadowing.
Thanks for us.
Say it again.
Thank you. Okay, we'll make sure that we've got the committees connected here.
Okay, and Nancy is shadowing my Deputy Comptroller, Beverly Fitzsimmons. Nancy. So you will be
Okay.
hearing her name. And Jason is shadowing Nancy.
Shadow after shadow.
Okay.
Not to be left out is Kelly Anderson, who happens to be a very smart attorney, has been with the staff since 2015. Kelly, can you stand? Okay.
Hi, Kelly.
He tried. Hi, Kelly. Cover. That's why he's growing a beard. and all that. Very smart, and he is shadowing Jason.
Everybody's shadowing.
And you all know Shauna, my administrative assistant, Shauna Morton. We will be meeting with the budget director to figure out how to enhance our budget.
Paul looks so happy.
And I know this is about budget, but also some of the things you were talking about. I think we just started a special committee for the Red Tape Commission that's supposed to look at all around processes and systems in place and recommendations. So that might be helpful to tie into some of the longer conversations about some of those other changes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. And that wraps up the comptroller's portion of our budget hearings today. We are a little bit behind schedule, but also before us, we've got public safety, corrections, and NSO. I'm going to give the committee a very quick 5-minute bio break. We're going to reconvene at 12:20 as we kind of connect and see who's going to be presenting these next three pieces before us here today.
Okay.
Given we've gone over our time, our schedule here, and the Chief of Police, Chief Tracy's been accommodating of our delay here. In light of that, what we're going to do is hear the police department's budget rather than the public safety department to accommodate the schedules of the chief and the Director of Public Safety. And so with that, Chief Tracy, if you want to come up, we can start to hear the budget of the St. Louis City Police Department. And Chief Tracy, if you want to give a little overview here, and I believe what we're going to be doing is taking a look at the line items here, starting on page 324. We're looking at budget items 650 and onward.
Thank you.
If I'm correct, or perhaps you have a presentation you want to share with us that might make this process a little easier.
Great. Well, Chairwoman, thank you very much, and thank you for moving a few things around. I really appreciate it. So I'm Robert J. Tracy. I'm the Police Commissioner of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. And with me today, David Daniels, who runs our finances and budget for the St. Louis Police Department, and also from my office, I have Monet Cintron, who had worked with me as my chief of staff back in Wilmington, Delaware, and now is working up in my office and helping me run a lot of things. She's very experienced also in budgets, CALIA, CompStat methodology, and really is going to help me as we try to move the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department along in some of the strategies that I've brought in and build off the good strategies here and where we've had successes in other police departments. So when we look at our 2024 proposed budget, compared to last year, which was $103,156,312, our proposed budget is $106,902,176, and it changes about $3.7 million, which comes out to about a I'm sorry, that's just with personal services, I'm sorry. Instead of me going through the lines, that would be a 3.63% increase. But if we total everything out, it's $129 million, $129,261,754 is what we proposed, and FY budget fiscal year 23 was at $122,000. So,
Chief, so we're all looking at the same thing. Do you have a presentation that you want to share with us?
I was just going to
or do
go
you-
off one of the things that I've had. I've broken out some of
Okay.
the items for a presentation.
And so where do we find that so we can look at the same numbers you're looking at?
So I condensed these. Well,
No, that's the general budget from Paul Payne.
The next page has the.
So Monet Cintron's going to bring a copy to the committee here. I just want to make sure she has the right page for each one of you and just show you what I'm working off of. And then get into the specifics. Like I said, I have David Daniels here that can get into those line items, and then I can come back and answer any operational questions or anything that applies to the budget, if that's okay with you, Madam Chair.
I think we're going to make copies, Chief. We'll
Oh,
be
you-
with you just
okay.
shortly. So, okay, broadly speaking, the budget has, the police department budget, can you repeat the numbers? I mean,
So what
I'll look at it, but-
we have, and you'll see the copy, it'll be the last bottom row, and when you get the copies of what you need, it's just the fiscal year 24 is proposed at $129,261,754, where it was at $122,453,682 from fiscal year budget 23, which is our proposed budget would be about a 5.56% increase is what we're before you today looking at. And that's a change of about $6.8 million.
$6.8 million.
So it was from 122 to 129, that's what I'm hearing.
122 to 129, correct, ma'am.
I found it.
And then,
Page 326.
Yeah.
That's the number he's quoting. See, 126 at the bottom. It's in the book. It's in this. Thank you.
Okay, all right, Chief, so. Okay. So the requested budget was 135.7. Proposed budget's 129.2. Can you walk us through a little bit about what was requested here? What the increases are, broadly speaking, for what was requested, maybe not granted, and help us understand what your department needs to perform optimally, what you might need, what you do have, and what might be missing. We want a full picture of the police department's budget.
Okay, come on over here, Dave.
And just before I start,
Introduce yourself, please.
yeah, just before I start, we're happy to share the detail that goes, into all of these numbers so that you can just have it, and we can just send you an Excel file so you can just have it and you can look at it, and that way you can look at the minutia as much as you want or as much as you need to, okay?
Sure. And to answer the request of the Alderwoman Boyd, David Daniels,
Daniels.
excuse me, and you are
Fiscal manager,
the fiscal manager for
the police
the police
department.
department. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So obviously here, the overall police department budget, when you include all these special funds, is about 183 million. Those special fund amounts have fluctuated. Paul Payne briefly brought up why they fluctuate. So our numbers, if you look at, if we just start off with the regular salaries on your first page, which I think on your first page is 364. Obviously the police salaries are actually going up because of a raise, right? And so it's not terribly useful to just look at the personal services part of the budget in isolation in the general fund, because so much of that expense is essentially shifted to other special funds.
Okay.
Right.
One thing that's really striking, and I'm sure there's an explanation that I'm unaware of here, but fiscal year 2022 versus 23, 24, we're looking at a doubling. You've got 65 million in 2022. What is going on here? I'm assuming special funds or something like that. What is the?
No. So, Paul. Okay. So, I think in 2022, what happened, parts of the police department got removed from the regular general fund. So, for example, all of patrol got moved to another fund center account. The Budget and Finance Division got moved. The IT section got moved. Communications got moved. So that figure is correct. The 60 million, that's correct just for the general fund for that year, but it's not really showing the entire police department, I don't believe.
Yeah, if you could, I'll direct your attention again to that budget summary that I mentioned earlier, where it's summary by department and fund on S11.
Okay.
And I always use this just as a quick, if you really just need a quick go-to reference. And if you look down at 650, which is the police department, you can see all their cost centers by fund there. And so the general fund combined is what you're seeing there and those numbers. And what Dave is referencing is that in, I believe it was fiscal 22, where the 1 year they broke out, the police department has all these different cost centers. And it was desired, the new administration, when they came in, to break them all out in the budget itself. And so it did break them out, and so it looked as though one center was reduced and another one was created. Last year, we reconsolidated them, so that now that you can see them all combined. But what you're looking at historically on some of those sheets is that what it looked like it was broken out. But if you look at the summaries, you can see what the totals are, apples to apples.
Okay. This is a little bit confusing, Paul. I appreciate that clarification, but, you know, I'm looking at a budget here that was presented by the chief, and also on page 326 of 129 million. And what you're pointing out on summary, S11 has a police department budget of 189.8.
Yeah, all
So
funds.
that would be-
189.8 is all funds.
Okay, and so what we're looking at from the chief is the general fund, or what? Sure, yeah, please. Yeah.
Sure.
So when I was looking at, when we reported that number out, it was just explained to me that that was a typo, so it was 135. So if you look on FY '24 proposed budget, our number, that 129, was not matching coming off the sheet when it was transcribed onto this PowerPoint. My apologies. So it's 135, 717, 311. So they're from, all the other numbers are correct on the PowerPoint thing that I gave you, with the exception of FY proposed total, which is 135, 717, 311.
Okay, chief,
And that would change an increase proposed,
what's the percentage increase?
10.8%.
10.8%. Now, Chief, that still differs from what the budget director was pointing us to on S11, which would be a proposed fiscal year 2024 police department budget of 189.8. What I'm looking at, so I'm trying to understand.
189.8 is all funds. So that would be general fund,
Right.
police contracts, use tax.
Correct. But, so then my question is, if what we're looking at from the chief here, this PowerPoint, is just the general fund? I'm looking at a police department budget of 189,814,896 on S10. And that includes a general fund budget of 132.8, plus some police contracts of about $1 million, $20 million in use fund, blah, 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 going down. But I guess what we're just trying to understand on a general sense is, what is the police department's budget?
129,262, that's department, that's 650, plus you'd have the, I believe, the Rangers and the Rangers and the city marshals.
And those are in the police, under the police department?
They are also in the police department, they're just a separate unit. It would be 650, so on page, you'd have page 326, which is the police department proper, but then on page 320,
Okay, oh, okay.
337 and 338, you would have the police, the marshals, and the rangers,
Okay, but
which are
the,
supplemental to the key.
so the 326, that 135, 717, 311 that the chief mentioned, that's the proposed, that's the requested budget, but, okay.
Where would you find the marshals?
Okay.
On what page?
So that number is correct in the
327.
PowerPoint.
If I'm not mistaken.
37 is
I mean,
Marshall's.
337, I'm sorry.
Got you. Thank you.
337 would be the
The marshals?
marshals, another 1.7 million.
I'm still trying to find that.
And that adds up to the 132,819.
Oh, the marshals and park rangers?
Yeah.
But then, what is the 188 in the S11?
That's all of the funds.
That's all of the funds.
I think that's what they're saying.
big difference? What's?
So I think all of these funds add up to 189,814.
Correct.
896.
But that's the full police department budget.
Right.
Yeah, and so what, with this 1,329 is the general fund portion for the police department.
Well, that's what I was asking Director Payne, but he indicated that was,
Yeah, what's the question?
Plus the marshals and the park rangers.
Yeah, this summary, which is summary by department and fund, it takes 650, regardless of whether it's 650 police department, 650 rangers, 650 park or city marshals, and puts it all together. So in the general fund, it was 132, so that includes your base department plus rangers and marshals.
Okay.
And the 650, so it's what it's trying to do is consolidate it all into one summary. But behind here is all the sheets that add up to all those numbers. But the total budget, all funds, is 189. That includes grants, asset forfeiture, use tax, the public safety sales taxes, and all those other things. So what you've got is, that's the overall, all funds inclusive. Then you have detailed sheets.
okay, I think what we're interested in is the full police department budget, regardless of the funds that we use to fund the police department.
And that's fine.
right? So-
And so that's,
And then we
this
can
summary
talk-
highlights it all.
And the summary is on page 324.
No, I'm looking at S11, sort of identifying them.
I was like, he's still on S11.
Okay, less 11. So, all right, 189, the budget, the proposed budget of 189.8. And so if we could speak to the police department budget of 189. I guess my question would be then, if that's the full budget, how do we break that out into personnel and the supplies and the marshals, et cetera? Where's the sort of summary or the breakout of the full police department's budget?
The line item budget.
Oh, okay, so I think we're starting on 324, is that, there we go. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so,
It's on page what?
324 is the police department, where the police department starts. So if we were to go through this, we've got the police department, 324, personnel at 106 million, that's just from the general fund. And then I'm presuming there's some additional personnel from some of these other sources.
Correct.
Okay. Do you have a more easy to understand, budget, that would look like this 189, and then here's what we're spending on personnel? I think many of the questions that we generally have during the budget process is, for example, how many police officers do we have right now? How many uniformed police officers do we have on our streets? How many vacancies do we have? What are we, what are we, something we mentioned earlier is the new fleet for take-home vehicles, taking a look at some of those things so we have a better, broader understanding of what it is the police department's doing with $189 million, what your needs are, what your unmet needs are, where we could, be helpful in filling those, and just kind of generally understanding the police budget. But
Did not break it down like that.
okay,
They need to go
Could,
back.
okay,
could do that.
but not today.
Something I could-
Paul's the budget director is raising his hand.
I was going to reference, and
I can
that's
help.
one of the things you get with this other document, which is the annual
Sure.
operating plan I talked about, it's got narratives. If you look on page 187,
187, and I'm sorry, Paul, are you looking at floor bill number 1?
now this is the annual operating plan, the one with all the dividers in it.
Not the one that doesn't have line item, I guess.
Yeah, it's more, it's got narratives and more summary information.
Okay, what page you want us to look
Page
at?
187. And it collapses all of that into, and you can see there's the 189, all the funds. And you got personal services, materials, and equipment all summarized there. And the number of uniformed and other non-uniformed, civilian and others. And it just sort of, it's a summary of all the line items that are in the line item detail.
Okay,
And all those other funds, most of which are personnel-related. You do have, like some of the grants, which would be asset forfeiture, things like that, that's separate. But most of those other ones are all personnel. So that sort of gives you a snapshot of some of your other, and this is true for all other departments as well. So when you go through and you want to look up summary information without all the detail in the line item, you go to these pages, and this will summarize it for you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. This is very helpful. Okay. So we're looking at a overall personnel budget. We have a roughly the same number of people, and just the increase would be in increased salaries. Is that correct? So we're looking at a total force of 1,246 persons, 469 of which are civilians. So how many uniformed police officers do we have right now?
Are we talking about budgeted or actual?
Actual.
I suppose, Chief. How many do we have budgeted?
We have budgeted, we just talked about the number, budgeted 1246 is the amount of commissioned police officers. So we have civilians and then commissioned. So these would be sworn police officers. We should be at 1246 is what we're budgeting.
So what do we actually have in numbers?
So right now, this number is dynamic. Had some just sworn in on, 4 sworn in on Friday that came back from other jurisdictions. And then usually what I've done in other budgets, how many people are out sick, how many people are FMLA, how many people are injured, and then I actually look, how many we still have commissioned. So this number, right now we're operating at 983.
How many were on duty as of, like, how many are on duty, for example, not at off-duty, light duty, sick, et cetera? What percentage or what number are actually on duty of those 983 officers?
Of those 983,
983.
that's a number that fluctuates every single day. Some are coming back off sick, some are coming back off FMLA, some are coming, we have extended leave on Family and Medical Leave Act, paternal leave. There's a lot of things that are going on. Each day that changes, so right now I have to get back to you with a percentage of the overall numbers.
Thanks, Chief. The reason I'm asking, I know that those numbers change, but I also recognize that a good number of our uniformed officers are unable to perform duty on a regular basis, and so it negatively impacts, our ability to patrol, and we want to make sure that we understand kind of where we're at in a police force sense.
Yeah, it's actually something that's it's happening across the United States. This is St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. This is happening locally. Every jurisdiction around us has, they look to, I call it, persuade our officers to go to their jurisdictions for better pay, incentives, take-home cars. In my last police department, they were offering $20,000 bonuses just outside, just to come over as seasoned officers. I think we're all hurting for officers in this profession. I think with the raise that the officers just received and the sergeants just received, and we're working on lieutenants and civilians contracts right now, they got a substantial raise that has made us competitive with surrounding counties. And where I just mentioned where the dynamics of the numbers fluctuate, I just swore in 4 police officers that came back from other jurisdictions because the grass was not greener out there, and they did come back. And potentially, I have 2 more going in, and I proposed, I'm being told they're sending me letters now, 2 more that are asking to come back from outside jurisdictions. I think because they do want to work with the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, but the economics weren't there and the contract wasn't there. Now that we've resolved that, I think that's going to help us where we're starting with about $53,000 is starting pay for someone coming into the academy, makes us competitive with all to recruit, and then it makes us competitive to retain. And as you can see, officers are coming back from other jurisdictions, and I think that's going to stem the tide. And I think as we move forward, after unprecedented times, the last few years that we've had, more and more people come back into this profession, and we got to do a better job recruiting, making sure people realize this is a noble profession, that this is a calling, this is where you can help people, and you can do the best in the communities that need us the most. And that's my job, too, to help start. And here 4 months now, but this is one of my priorities, to make sure we get that done. Start to build those ranks back up to the budget strength. But I wish I had 200 officers in my back pocket when I came from the East Coast. I didn't. I only came with one person, and she's standing next to me. So that's kind of what we have to do in the long-term plan, but it's a priority that we have right now, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chief. If you want to give us a broad overview of your budget now that we've kind of figured out where we are numbers-wise and what we're looking at, kind of broadly speaking, what the biggest changes are, what you've requested, like I said, any holes, how you feel about the budget that you have and your ability, our police department's ability to function optimally under it.
I will hit on the broad points with that, because I do have a few points to make, but I want David to hit on some of the points where we're up and down. And then I know this is something that's still in process, but there are some important things that I think to move this department forward and make this city safer. There are some ideas that I have that I think are very important, but I'll let David get into some of the details that you just asked.
Great, thank you, Chief.
Okay. Just going to briefly hit in the personal services general fund. So obviously, because of the increases in pay, overtime has gone up. Our overtime request has gone up. And that's in line with both the raises and with the amount of money that we're actually spending on overtime. When it comes to supplies, overall supply budget is only up about $300,000. And a lot of that is just inflation. Prices of everything we buy has gone up, sometimes quite significantly. The non-capital equipment, Paul was generally very generous to us. However, to make sure there's enough money for the salary increases, he did cut our request for computer equipment, which is the 54 and the non-capital equipment. We have a lot of aging computers and servers and storage devices, and we will make do, but that line for computer equipment, and when I send you the detail of our request, it'll include, I cut our request down to what Paul ended up allocating in the budget, but you'll see where we cut.
And David, you're looking at, where are you looking at
It's
this?
probably page 365 for you.
He changed it.
I think your first page is 364.
324?
324, pardon me, 325.
Sorry, Ann.
So it's account, it's computer equipment, 540000.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, so the computer equipment is an area of, it looks like a $2,000 cut, pretty small.
Well, here, I cut our budget down to meet the allocation, but it was to meet the allocation, not to necessarily meet the need.
Okay.
Right, so I'm just, you said to point out something that was where we thought we needed more money. That's where we could use some more money.
Okay, so broadly speaking, we have the raises and some that have been helpful, right? And so I guess what we're looking for is kind of like the big picture. You know, the police department's doing well in regards to compensation, pensions, et cetera, but you're pointing out that there's some additional IT needs and other things not reflected in the current budget.
Right.
Nor the requested budget. You pare down the requested budget to meet the requested allocation. Okay.
And the biggest paring down we did was for our fleet.
Okay.
And I think we recently, I forget the number of vehicles, we got some new vehicles, but we've had situations in the last year where we put 3 men to a car, or pardon me, 3 officers to a car because of not having enough vehicles.
Wow.
And that's because when the vehicles get old and there's downtime on the vehicles and they don't get repaired quickly enough, you know, we're already, I would say, short-staffed. I think everyone would agree that we probably need more officers out on the street, but it's very frustrating when there are not cars available for them to drive.
How many vehicles do we have right now in the fleet, in the uniformed officers
So
fleet?
I don't want to guess. We'll give you that.
Okay.
We'll get that number back to you.
If that's a real need, I mean, if we are tripling manpower, which is something we're obviously short on because of a lack of vehicles, vehicles are cheaper than human capital. So certainly we would need to make sure that we have the equipment to properly police.
That may be one of the biggest frustrations is vehicles and getting enough vehicles.
Okay. So yeah, having the number of that and the additional needed resources there would be very helpful. One area that has been a consistent question over many, many years is the area of overtime for police. Can you talk about that a little bit and point us to where the overtime is in the budget, what we've allocated for that and where we've spent?
So
I think it's on 324 in here. And it's the,
4th line.
yeah, the 4th line. Yeah.
So here, our overtime has been in really for many years now. Our overtime has been driven by not actually having our full staffing level, and that just drives overtime because district captains want to fill cars when they're available. And that's just going to drive overtime for you. And it's kind of sad to say, but overtime's one of your better buys in a way, because when we pay overtime, that means we're not paying health insurance, pension. So, you know, overtime is cheaper in a way, but the downside to that is officer burnout, because officers only want to work so much overtime. And, you know, informally, officers have come to me and said, hey, you know, our captains, you know, they keep on, you know, they want us to work overtime. The lieutenants beg us to work overtime.
Yeah.
Let me get in here. So now we're talking about an operational, as we're talking about the numbers. And David's absolutely right. And in the 4 police departments I worked in, it is cheaper overall for the city to pay overtime than hire new officers, but that's not the case we want to be in. What we want to do is, you know, overtime usually goes up when the amount of personnel goes down, only because less officers are picking up where we would have had more officers. It actually is cheaper, but you want to make sure your officer health and wellness is one of the number one things we always look at, because if an officer is fatigued and everything else, then they're prone to make mistakes. And we want to make sure that we don't allow that to happen. We also got to make sure that we're looking at, when we're on straight time, making sure that we're looking at the schedules, making sure that we're keeping within a safe limit of how many people we give off, because giving off sometimes can lead, some of the things that we can do, we actually, in my other places, I continue to look at, all right, are we giving too many people off? People do want time off, but we have to make sure that we have to keep officer safety issues that are out on the street, and at the same time, I don't want to make sure that we're always just backfilling with overtime. That being said, there's operationals, but from arrests to events to things actually making sure that when we know from intelligence that there might be things that might be conflicts that are brewing out there, that we might need additional officers in certain areas to keep places safe and get between conflicts, and especially some of the gun violence that's happening. So we do make those discretionary calls, but when the captain and the lieutenant makes those calls, I now have put majors over each patrol area. So that has to be cleared through the major. So there is a process with the checks and balances that I wanted to make sure that additional layer, there's one major and two acting majors right now above each patrol area, north, central, and south. And these are the type of things that I bring in, looking at that we're running this place in the right way, that we can keep a good eye on overtime. But I don't think there's a police department, there isn't a police department in the United States that doesn't necessitate overtime. We just got to keep a good eye on it.
Yeah, thank you, Chief. One of the things that's really happened over the years is that we've gone over significantly on our overtime budget. So I guess my question would be, seeing what we had $7 million allocated last year for overtime, what did we actually spend on that? And then second to that would be, I see that we've got a requested budget of overtime of $9.2 million, but an allocated proposed budget of $10.6, and so kind of jumps out at me that we've allocated more than requested here. But if we could understand first, did we overspend last year and it would not be the first year. In fact, it'd be pretty much in line with years in the past. But just, I think that's a question that the committee had with regards to overtime. Helping us understand.
Did we overspend on overtime? Yes.
Last year? Okay, so we were budgeted at $7 million. Do you know what we spent last year on overtime?
No, but we will get that for you.
And then just quickly understanding why the proposed budget is significantly higher than the requested budget on overtime, is it presumably because of the overspending from last year? Okay. Yeah, helping us get those figures would be helpful. Is there anything else that you would like to touch on? Go ahead.
And Alderwoman, also the pay increase.
Okay.
Overtime's more expensive.
Time and a half goes up.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on that. When I talked about the cost of the pay package that we talked about earlier, all those additional costs were added in. And so if you're increasing 8 to 13% pay increase, then your overtime could be expected to increase. So when we added costs, that was included in that dollar.
Another question that we get a lot about is with regards to park rangers. Where are those are falling underneath this? Is that correct? That's my understanding.
They,
It was below Marshall's.
Say that again.
It was below the Marshall's tab.
park rangers are in their own separate budget.
Like 260.
Next year, we'll do a better job of kind of giving you what we anticipate, kind of talking through so you could be better prepared.
So okay, so with the park rangers, if this helps, their budget essentially stays the same, their staffing level stays the same.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I see that. And we have a total, do you know how many employees that represents? Park rangers are so helpful. keeping our parks safe.
So there's 31 authorized, 29 actual.
Is there anything else you'd like to touch on with, as part of the presentation of the police department's budget, as it relates to what you're budgeted and what maybe wished that isn't budgeted before we go into questions from the committee? Chief, did you have anything that you wanted to discuss before we go into questions from the committee?
One thing before we go into questions, committee. You know, also, a lot of police departments down throughout the United States, and so we really have to leverage technology. And I want to make sure that how important that can be for public safety. And I know there's some debates out there.
Can you talk into the mic, please, so people at home can hear you? Sorry.
How's this?
Yes,
All right.
good.
So it's a little far away. There we go. Can you hear me now? So talking about gunshot technology and some of the things that are out there, we're going to make sure that sometimes it's looked at, it has to be leveraged in the right way, in a proper way. And some of these things that happen get us to a scene quicker. Where people are injured, we can render first aid. We can make sure that we can get to a scene and also collect evidence, make sure if there's someone that's going away that's an offender, we can gain evidence and maybe catch someone that is a trigger puller that's out there that's harming our community. And, you know, since I've come here, I'm a big proponent of it, and because it has worked in other places, helped save lives, and also helped reduce violence. So I think that's something that we continue need to look at and make sure that we're utilizing the right way. And I promise you, under the strategies I bring in, that is something that's looked at very seriously, and then making sure that it's in our overall plan that we're using each and every day when you're matching shell casings and NIBIN and connecting the dots. And then, and I think that's led to a lot more clearances and clearance rates of individuals that have done bad things out there, and bringing justice to those families and to those victims.
Thank you, Chief. With regards to technology, one thing you mentioned, the technology, the ShotSpotter, is that?
We have ShotSpotter here, but I always like to go with there's other vendors out there, so I always go with gunshot technology, but if you bring up the specific, which is ShotSpotter that we use here, yes, it is.
Is that an effective technology?
Yeah, I think they changed their name to Sound Thinking, but it's a very effective technology, and I've used it in my last place, and we were able to reduce shootings by 50% and non-fatal shootings and overall murders by 60%. And a big part of it was using ShotSpotter in the right way. And also, we saved a lot of lives in first aid to individuals that our officers are rendering first aid by being on the scene, because sometimes if someone calls 911, if you've ever been around gunshots, if it echoes off places, you don't know exactly where it is, and it can pinpoint the location for ambulances and both our officers as well.
With ShotSpotter or the
Gunshot technology.
Gunshot technology, do we have an increase? I know that we do not have the entirety of the city of St. Louis covered with that technology as we currently. Do we have any plans to expand that technology into other parts of our city?
Well, right now I'm evaluating how we're doing things with it. I already know the neighborhoods. I have a list of where the neighborhoods it is. I think it's in the right place where it needs to be right now, where things are happening. If there's an opportunity to expand it, I would always love to expand it. I'm being very diplomatic with the budget, and my first year going through this budget and just looking at things. But it's certainly, as I stay here longer and probably in the next cycle, you might see a big push by me, because I know there might be, I think the Police Foundation is picking up a portion, and we also have a grant also that's picking up a portion of that, and they're both going away. So I don't know how we're going to make up that difference. If that goes away, does the areas become smaller instead of expanding it or keeping it the same? I might have to reduce the geographic areas of ShotSpotter. I have to talk with the vendors and see what the next steps are.
With regards to other technology, cameras or other things like that, are we looking at other types of technology to either increase or bring to St. Louis that would improve our effectiveness as a police department?
I think we have really good technology with our real-time crime center, with license plate readers, the amount of cameras. It's the upkeep of the cameras that usually go down, and I think, as a Board of Alders, one of the questions there's some city cameras, there's owned by private entities, and also that are run by the police department. We've really tried, since I've been here, to try to put tickets out to make sure we can repair them in a timely manner and try to assist the rest of the city and even private entities, because we know how important it is. So that's something technology should always stay, because that's always improving, and we want to make sure we do that. And I think it's been kicked around. Other technology that's out here that I think that we do need in this city is, if we can have red light cameras and also technology that can catch people that are going over the speed limits to assist us as we try to curb the reckless driving and people going through that with our department and the amount of motor vehicle summons we have. And I don't want it to be for revenue, but I would like it to change behavior, because this is, once again, I always continue to say this because I can talk about other cities. It's not the only city that this phenomenon has kind of gotten a lot worse in the last few years as far as how people are driving on the roads, and then you're seeing the dangerous conditions, and then you're seeing people getting hurt or fatalities that have kicked up because of that.
Yeah, no, Chief, I commend you for bringing that up. I think we all have seen it, experienced it, lived through it. We have a pedestrian fatality 3 times the national average, and of course, just driving in the city of St. Louis is a dangerous thing to do. Certainly walking or biking is. And the mayor, as we all know, has brought up red light cameras along with the president of the board. Is there anything in the budget to cover the expense of that? Were we to be able to find a legal path to bringing those to the city of St. Louis?
Well, I don't think that would be coming out of the police department's budget when we're talking about those types of cameras. In other places, it came from an overall general budget from the city, the way it's been run. We did monitor it and make sure we were a part of it, but it didn't come out of the police department's budget.
Okay. With regards to cameras, for the knowledge of new Alder folks here, as the chief was pointing out, the police department has cameras that they have purchased either through the foundation or through the police department's budget, and they maintain. We also have other cameras that the city has purchased through Ward Capital. Alderpersons have purchased those cameras, and they are handled separately. They are upkept separately, and I want to commend the police department, because my understanding in recent audits that I've very informally conducted, the police department cameras are almost entirely in working order. That is not the same case for Ward cameras purchased with Ward Capital. There's an enormous difference in functionality in that, and something that I think we as the Board of Aldermen have to address if we want to have some uniformity, especially with regards to what is expected of our residents when we have cameras in the neighborhood. Whether they work or not, whether we want them or not, that there should at least have some, there should at least be some transparency in the functionality of it. So I'd like to explore kind of how we can better invest in those Ward Capital purchased cameras, because those funds right now are not well spent if those cameras aren't functioning and assisting.
Yes, ma'am.
Anything else you'd like to touch on before we open it up to questions to the committee as far as the presentation is concerned?
No, I think the specifics of the questions we'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, David. Did you have another thing?
Just one thing. ShotSpotter has always been paid out of asset, pardon me. ShotSpotter has always been paid out of asset forfeiture funds. It's just we've never had the funding to put into the regular general fund, and really it's something that belongs in the general fund. And currently in asset forfeiture, we budgeted for the original ShotSpotter coverage area, which is 3.5 square miles. But, to expand that any further would mean cutting other projects. And since ShotSpotter is something it seems that the city wants on a continual basis, at some point we should be able to work it into the general fund budget so that it is it's just part of doing business as a city. Because something you should know about asset forfeiture funds, now with both, this is not a political discussion, this is just the reality that both members of both parties are looking unkindly on asset forfeiture, right? And so that funding source is just going to drop and drop. So it would be nice at some point if we moved asset or ShotSpotter into the general fund budget.
I think that the asset forfeiture funds, as a general question, has been on the table. You know, where are they? How much are we getting in asset forfeiture? What are they spent on, et cetera? I don't know if that's part of this, but I know that's a question that has been percolating through the Board of Aldermen for some time.
Yeah, it should, asset forfeiture should be in the budget.
Page
The line item.
252. I mean, 352.
Okay.
That's funds, total funds. One, so there's a, but I think that would be related to the asset for, I get, the question would be, what is the income from asset forfeiture? Is that, I guess, could,
I mean, I have a question on it, but
yeah, well, okay. Well,
I'll
I'll
wait.
just turn it over to the committee for questions. How about we start there? Alderwoman from the first?
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for being here. It's great to hear from you and hear what you're proposing. Regarding the vehicles, I know that the Board of Aldermen did allocate funds for new vehicles in the American Rescue Plan Act, and that's figured in here, and you're saying that's still not enough?
Our fleet manager certainly does not think so. And we can certainly have him provide a more detailed, reason for why we need the vehicles that he requested. So we can certainly provide more detail on the vehicles for you.
Okay. Great. I think that was my main question. You covered a lot of the things that I wanted to ask about, so I'll yield to other committee members and maybe circle back if I come up with more.
Okay. Alderwoman from the seventh?
Okay, so I'll start with where you were. For ShotSpotter, I know that the chief said he's found it to be effective in some places. I'm curious about, do you have any data on the accuracy of ShotSpotter?
Yeah, usually they say within 30 feet, and usually it really comes down to almost 2 to 3 feet in some areas, unless there's special circumstances. So the accuracy is there. And then we can always call up with an audit when we hear ShotSpotter. We can't, if we don't see shell casings, but obviously sometimes if they're shooting from cars, shell casings go back in the cars. So if they are shooting from vehicles. So the accuracy, what I've found ShotSpotter to be within a few feet of where the actual shooting happened.
And do you know when we started as a city using ShotSpotter?
I would have to defer, David.
I'd have to look back to when I think Sam Dotson was maybe serving in the chief's office or in the board office.
That's okay.
It's been a long time since I wrote the original grant.
Yeah.
That would be 10 years, approximately. So I think that's when a lot of police departments looking at it. Even when I was a chief in Chicago, we started looking at ShotSpotter around 2013 as well.
Okay, I would just be curious about having the percentage of accuracy when SLMPD is dispatched to respond to ShotSpotter, like if there was some data on the accuracy of that. And then honestly, I would like the same thing for any technology that we might be moving forward. I know Chairman Spencer and there's been many conversations on red light and different surveillance mechanisms. I want to see data on where it has been implemented in other places. And if we implement it in St. Louis, then I also would like to see data on since we implemented, this is the projections that have resulted in that so that we're making, evidence-based decisions. Because I've heard mixed things about ShotSpotter in other places. So I'm just curious about how it's worked in St. Louis.
Right.
And then I had a question too, and this might be for Mr. Payne. So I was trying to get a better understanding of the police unit in the city's councilor's office has I think a $5.3 million budget allocation for litigation, things, of that matter. But then the affirmative litigation unit that covers if the Attorney General sues us, which happens often, is $600,000. And then I also noticed that even the Civil Rights Unit has about 560 or something like that. So I'm just curious about that big discrepancy between those. And also, I'm curious about just the big difference between those. And then also, is $600,000 is that enough in our budget now to cover us for impending litigation? I mean, I know the politics isn't on y'all end, but we have the repro fund, we have things going on now with gender affirming care, and so I'm just curious, are we prepared for some of those lawsuits and things that might be coming?
I think a lot of those have to do with a lot of human resource issues, and then also litigation that comes down. That'll come down to the law department within the city, and they're all tied together. Whether we have representatives in the police department, obviously because of the type of work that we do, there's a lot more litigation that comes in. But overall, the city, we all answer up to the city councilor, and I think they can explain better why we have it divided and the amounts that are in those places, and how many people we would need for some of the situation you talked about as far as incoming and also litigation that's going on at this time.
Yes, I'm sure you.
Thank you, Chief, and I would also second that in terms of when you get to the city councilor's budget, that's where most of our funding is set aside for litigation.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see it in two spots. Historically, when local control occurred, the city councilor's office absorbed the legal unit under the police department. So under the city councilor's office, you have the regular city councilor's office, then you have the police unit under the city councilor's office. There are two line items in there specifically to address judgments, and they go, basically it's a contribution to special fund. $2 million just overall general fund for litigation in the primary unit of the city councilor's office. In the police unit of the city councilor's office, there's a $4 million allocation. So combined, it's $6 million. And that was the request. And it's been that way from the city councilor's office for the last couple of years. But that was the request we'd received from them.
And do we usually spend that?
Yeah. What happens is that is contributed to the judgment fund. And we've had some significant payments in the last couple fiscal years, and it would be spent. But the way it works is those are contributions to a judgment fund. And then when a case occurs and where there's a liability of the cities, they pay out of that judgment fund whatever the amount may be.
And so my other part, and maybe because you've worked with ENA a little bit, the other part of my question about being concerned at the $600,000 in the affirmative litigation unit for the budget, there's.
Yes, that's a separate thing,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not judgments. That's for it's actually as a reverse. It's the city councilor allocating personnel to go after other things. Let's say whether it's more recently the opioid case or something like that to represent the city on behalf of the city to go after any sort of violations and such to get recompense to the city for its expenses related to that. So yeah, that's sort of the reverse of judgment, because they're actually, by affirmative litigation, basically you're talking about going after particular entities who may be violation of the city code or some sort of consumer violations of where we can get funds to the city.
So that's not the same fund that it would, for example, the Reproductive Justice Equity Fund. If the Attorney General is suing us for that, does the city councilor, is the affirmative litigation, is that the budget that the money to defend that case would come out of? Do you know what, if the state is suing the city, what is the budget for that?
If the state is suing, I'll have to defer to the city councilor on the specifics on that. But I can tell you that the judgment accounts on the general fund are, as I described in those two units. The affirmative litigation is for actually proactively going out and suing or pursuing action on behalf of the city to redress some industry, something in the industry which has done damage to the city in some way or form.
Like the Kia suit.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. That's a perfect example, the Kia, the suit against Kia.
Okay, and you're not sure what the other part of the state would be? That's a question for the city councilor. I was just curious where that budget,
Well, that is,
a budget for that?
that budget is in this, the unit under, specifically under the use tax fund. So again, if you look at the summary of the budgets and you look under the use tax, there's that unit for the city councilor, and that is specifically the affirmative litigation unit.
Okay, thank you.
Alderwoman, did you have further questions?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Thank you.
Alderman from the 14th?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief, for being here. And I want you to know you have the support of this board as we all are trying to work together to figure out how we reduce crime in our neighborhoods and community. And thank you for taking the charge to come here and to be assistance. I got a few questions. So I know we mentioned and said that, so roughly we have about 983 police. We have budgeted for about 1,200 of them. Last year, would you know how many we had last year? Out of like, were we up 983 or were we down 983? And I know you're new here, so.
Yeah, and that number's dynamic, and one of the things, we just had the Academy Class 16 that just graduated last month. We have another Academy class that, I think it's down to 12 right now, because some have not made it through the full Academy. We're graduating in September. We have about a little over 40, it might even be up to 50 now. I'm not sure where the count is, applicants that we're looking at to start a class in August. So we're trying to keep up with attrition, and at the same time, some are retiring, some will go into other police departments, but as I talked about, you start seeing some coming back now. I think a lot of them certainly miss working in an urban environment compared to the environments we went to, and also the economics are a little better to come back and stay here, and we're more competitive. I'll get you the number of what the officers that we had last year and then where we're up. I know this police department, I started doing a historical study where the population, where it was, and then I think close to 20 years ago, it was like 330,000, but we had close to budgeted 1,600 police officers. So at that time, we did have a lot more police officers. And budget has come down, and the budget strengths come down. But I think we have to start looking at new ways to recruit, and then working with Director Sonia Gray as far as what we can do a better job of as in policing, how we can work together, and she's very open until how much we can get involved compared to the way it was done in the past, and that's very refreshing, and we'll see what the results are going to be shortly and as we go on this year.
And I appreciate getting that number, because the reason I asked about that number, and I know it's a challenge to hire, and like you say yourself, and our new personnel director, who's fabulous, Ms. Grace, is trying to bump up the people there, because, and I think the answer was kind of questioned in the inquiry with Chairwoman Spencer and yourself with the overtime, because I was curious if we had less or if we had the same amount of employees or less. I know you said the reason there's a nice big jump in overtime this year, and you're saying we need that overtime because we're down officers?
No, I'm saying that sometimes to do the work of what the amount of officers we used to have, overtime goes up. But I think Director Payne also hit on that the salaries are up. So if you do the same amount of overtime and time and a half is higher, I think we're looking at that. If we stay somewhat the same, the price of overtime is going to go up because time and a half goes up.
Gotcha. And last year we used all of that overtime money, that $7 million that was out there we used.
We're going to get back to you on what was the actual amount. So
Okay.
I'll get back to the
It would be
committee.
nice, because on the state level, we see those, how much did you ask for, how much did you spend?
Right.
And if you didn't use all, and I see you projected another roughly $3 million, and I know the pay went up with the contract and everything, but, just trying to figure out what's the need for that big increase. Fleets, so we talked about fleets and said that we're down cars.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at that. I think also there's a twofold issue. We're starting to see new cars come into the fleet, as the older one talked about, and I'm starting to see new cars out there. I think, what is the efficiencies of turning around cars when they have to go for periodic maintenance, or they're a small accident, and how fast they get turned around at the motor pool? And those are the things that, we have to look at to see, do they have enough, when someone has less people in a certain area, and I understand that might be an issue where you have less mechanics or people doing that work, it could slow down everything, not just for the police department, but for all departments where the maintenance area is for vehicles. So,
And you'll be getting that number of how many up and running cars we got, how many cars now? Because I know, and not to cut you off, Chief, I know also we are giving 18 million per fire and police of that big package, but also in that is 2 million for fleet cars and this take home, which I'm curious, did you guys do take homes in your other city, like take home police cars?
no.
Okay. So, and do you know if there's any research out there to say if a person take home their car, they stay on the force, or the people on their block feel more safe? Is that, well, let me first slow down. The 2 million for the take home cars, is that to add more or to repair cars?
If you have to take home cars, that's one of the incentives, like trying to give bonuses for people to come into your police department. We don't do bonuses. If you want to be a St. Louis Metropolitan Police officer, I really want you to come in for the right reasons, and a car shouldn't entice you and/or bonus.
Yeah.
But if it is a perk that you do live in the city, because a lot of people can move outside the city, and if that's a perk that we're willing to give to officers that want to remain in the city. Some want to take it outside the jurisdiction or going further. I have to review those things. I think it's just in the city right now, and which it should be. I'm a big believer. Listen, I don't make the rules. New York City, you were allowed to leave the city when I was an NYPD cop. Chicago, you had to live in the city. Wilmington, you had to live for the first 5 years, and here, you can live outside the city, and they talk about recruitment, expanding the pool to bring officers in. But incentives of a car, let's see what happens. I think the biggest thing for the incentive for these police officers was the raise that was approved by the administration that we just gave them to make us competitive in a new contract.
Yeah.
I think that had the biggest effect. I'm not saying that incentive of having a car will make some people pretty happy. Yeah, that'll help out.
Yeah, no, and
so
I agree.
I'm not dismissing that. I want to say don't do that. But if we're doing that, I think it's a nice perk if you do live in a city.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think this mayor administration,
And you have an omnipresence of that person parking that car on that block, and then you certainly start to. It gives that there's a car right there wherever they have to park. I don't want to become a scarecrow that it's always seen there, but knowing that you have a car parked there gives a presence that there is law enforcement area that might be in plain clothes.
yeah, and like I was about to say, I agree. I think this mayor administration is probably one of the biggest contracts for police officers, and a lot of times we talk about we need to hire more. First, we got to maintain and keep the ones we have here. We have a bleeding. So unless we take care of what's at home now, the ones that come in usually come and go. But to that fleet question, so the 2 million is for purchases of new ones, or to upgrade, or just either way?
When we talk about upgrade, when you do purchase, we purchase a vehicle for our private vehicles, then they got to be outfitted. You got to put the equipment in, you got to put the radio in, you got to put the computer in, you got to put the lights in. So you always have to budget also for that and any repairs of that type of equipment. I'm not sure, I'll have to get back what that 2 million is allocated specifically, but that's certain. I'll get back to this committee as soon as we leave this meeting. I want to make sure I'm accurate giving you that answer.
And I promise of time, I only got a few more questions, and I'll keep them short. We talked about fleet. So one question on page 352, I know we had talked about asset forfeiture funds. As I look at that document, can you explain to me what the difference is? Hold on, let me pull it up on my thing before I start asking questions. Well, I got it right here. So, a few folk questions. What are these funds used for? And when I look at FY23, it looks like if I'm not mistaken, What usually are these funds used for? I'll start with that.
Asset forfeiture funds are used for projects that the chief of police deems worthy of funding. So those can run anywhere from paying for ShotSpotter to paying for some other technology project, paying just for equipment that some unit needs, but what it can't really be used for is personnel.
Okay. If we could get a number also of how much of that last year, that million that was allocated, how much was spent, because it looks like for FY24, a lot of that funds that you guys are asking for are going to computer software licensings, which I'm curious, what does that mean?
Okay. So, as you know, the city has...
Because historically, we only spent rough and 30-some thousand. In 21, it was 22,000. Then in 22, it was 2,000. We didn't spend nothing last year, but it's a whopping number of 775,000 this year for computer licensing. So are we buying new programs or systems or?
So the city has put in a new Oracle system, so it's for general ledger and payroll. However, this new system does not have the functionality that our current PeopleSoft system has. It does not have the capacity that our current PeopleSoft system has, and our PeopleSoft system is not just a time entry system. IAD uses it. A number of divisions use it for things that we bought the system in 2008. We've never upgraded it. And when the city decided to go to the new system, the new Oracle system, it decided not to bring over history. And our city councilor's office was like, well, we need to retain that information because we have to have it for litigation. And because PeopleSoft, we put it in place in 2008 and have never upgraded it, it now has to be upgraded because the support for it has ended for the version that we're on, which is a 2008 version. And the city councilor's office said that, you know, we need to keep it. And we're currently using it for, you know, a lot of things, but one of the things we're using it for is timekeeping. And I'm just expressing an opinion now, but I have heard from other city divisions that have used the new UKG system, which is the timekeeping system, that they find it very cumbersome. And the last thing I want is for lieutenants and sergeants working in the district to spend even more administrative time trying to get people's time into a new system. Because their time is very valuable and supervision is very valuable. And I will tell you that this money is going to be used to upgrade PeopleSoft because, one, the city councilor's office suggested that we keep it because they need it for litigation purposes, and two, we use it for a lot more than just timekeeping. And if you wish, we can send you a list of all the. Some people don't take a hint. We can send you a list of all the applications, police department applications that depend on PeopleSoft.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then I'm assuming the professional services kind of.
ShotSpotter.
So we do plan to purchase new ShotSpotters? Is this?
This would only support the existing, or the original 3.1 square mile shot spotter.
So why is it last year we only had 18,000 and this year we have 243? Is that line always to support shot spotters? If you can get in the mic, Chief.
I don't know why, it might have came from another line and only 18,000 is left. In my experience, ShotSpotter, that's an annual cost. And for that line item to be 18,000, you're looking in years past, Alderman, we'll have to get back to you and see if money was taken from a different area to support that. All right, so that's an anomaly, because I know the cost should stay consistent unless we pulled the money from other line item. We'll research that for you and get back to you.
Gotcha, because that'd be helpful. Even if it was an error, I would just be curious. Not that it's much.
If we got ShotSpotter for 18,000, and I'd go, I would buy more and try to cover the whole city. So that had to come from somewhere else. They're in the business of making money as well.
Yeah.
So
have we bought any new shot spotters?
not since I've been here, and I'm not sure if it expanded. I have to research that, when it expanded. When did we start ShotSpotter? That was the question I was asked earlier that I have to get back on. I think it started a decade ago. I'll let you know if we've expanded from the 3.1 miles, if it started out at 1 square mile. I have done that in other places, but I have to research that here in our department, in our city.
Maybe the gentleman to your right, I know if we've expanded.
It started off at 3.1 square miles.
Okay.
And
then have we expanded?
Then the police foundation, paid for 2 additional coverage areas of 0.7 miles and 1.1 square miles, and then a grant paid for another 0.19 miles.
Okay. I think that is all the questions I have right now. Well, actually, I have one more. I'm so sorry. Just one more quick one. Out of the 983 police officers, do you know how many, well, current officers we have, do you know how many are like white shirts? How many white shirts we have? I don't know the respective sergeants.
It depends. If you want to go sergeants, we can break it out: sergeants, lieutenants, captains, majors, and lieutenant colonels, including myself. We'll give you that breakout, so you can see how many officers are and everything else. I'll get that back to the committee.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. The reason I asked, and I want to make sure we have a ladder to promote people, but sometimes I see a lot more white shirts than blue shirts. So just.
Well, sometimes if you see white shirts, that's good because they're out there. I want them out on the street.
Well, maybe more meetings I see them, but yeah, I'd love to see them out in the street too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is that all, Alderman? Okay. Any other questions from any other members? I saw we had a couple of other members of the board circling in and out. Any other members of the Board of Aldermen want to ask any questions before we? Okay. Chief, thank you again for coming before us. And we've got a couple of follow-up items for you. I really appreciate your flexibility here as we kind of get these budget hearings going this week. And we stand ready to hear some additional information from your office. And just thank you for your time today.
Madam Chair, thank you, and the committee, thank you very much.
Your service. Thank you for your service to our city. Okay, and with that, we are going to adjourn the Budget and Public Employees meeting for today and reconvene tomorrow morning at 9:30. Thank you all.